One and all, and welcome to another edition of the Dinner Club, Jam, Jam, Jam. Starting off with yours truly, of course, and my friend Raven. How are you?
I am okay.
Thank you for being here. I mean, you couldn't have slid in any more. Like, wow, that was pretty impressive.
That was pretty good. That was pretty good. Hang
Yeah. So, I assume that you got to experience the interview last night from the sideline.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, it was a really nice interview. I'm really enjoying doing these interviews.
Yeah, they're
And
fun. They're
yeah, I
fun.
think it's fun. I don't know if I should try to come up with different questions or not, though. You know what I mean? But no, I think it's better that we have the same for everybody as I go through. Really,
Seems to
uh,
be working.
this is working all right. Yeah, it
Yeah.
turns out okay. Anyway, so yeah, hang on, just gonna okay. Um, well, obviously, lots been going on because I haven't been around to do these jamborees now for what must be 6 or 7 weeks. I don't know.
Something
Um,
like that.
yeah. Anyway, so because I have been relatively detached from the world, what's happening?
Nothing.
Nothing. Everything's status quo. Everything's fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much. It is what it is. It's been, the world has been quiet. You know, Nothing
Yeah.
happened.
Nothing happened. No. Well, I didn't get to see. Did you get to see any of Biden's speech today?
Oh no, I didn't even know. He,
Yeah, apparently he gave like a really important speech today, and I guess in Poland. And I've only seen people's reactions to it on Twitter. I haven't actually seen the speech yet. So apparently it was like epic, you know. But it could only be as epic as Joe can make a speech because he's not the best speechifier, you know.
yeah, it's just true. An orator, he's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's unfair to compare anybody to Obama when it comes to oration, though. But um,
That's
yeah,
true.
yeah. He had a gift for that, really. I think in the beginning, didn't everybody sort of was like, "Oh yeah, so what? He gives great speeches. So what?" I mean, well, actually, we had been such a long time since anybody had given great speeches. It was kind of nice. Hello, Jack. How you doing?
Hi, how's it going?
Hey, Jack.
Hey,
Hi.
Did you have like an accident with some chemicals, or am I just used to seeing you with like a beanie on so much that I didn't realize you was bald?
yeah, I've been bald for a very long time.
Not
So,
Wow.
not like a week or anything like that.
yeah, I think you're used to seeing me in the winter time when it
Right.
really becomes a problem.
Right. And how are things out in your part of the country?
Well, it's been a while, so I'll just catch you up real quick. I moved to a new studio, which is much larger and has more amenities. I'm producing a bunch of marionette kits. I've also built myself a video studio, so I'll be doing YouTube a lot more. Just in general, lots of improvements the last few months.
Well, that's cool. I hope you do YouTube a lot more. I mean, I know better than to say that ever again because every time I come back to my own channel, I say I'm going to be making videos more often, and then I disappear for 9 months or a year or
So
whatever.
I've actually made a few more videos recently too. I'm actually working on another one. So.
Oh, good.
Wow, how cool is that? Well, I've been away from the internet more or less off and on, but for most of the last 7 weeks, I think I've been, I spent about 2 weeks in St. Louis where I was online again. But when I'm out in California, I don't have internet because I'm living in a house that's for sale that's not occupied. So, there's no service there really. But anyway, so yeah, I really am. I mean, I was kind of joking, but I'm also kind of not. I mean, obviously, I know there's a war going on in Ukraine right now. But I am really sort of largely disconnected because of my lack of access to media, and not I didn't really mind it too much. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's nice to decompress and take a break and not, uh, have your nose up the world's bum so often.
Yeah, indeed. And the situation in the world is particularly scary. I mean, I know that you have um, concerns about nuclear, This is the type of nuclear I completely share those concerns on. We are not in a great position if people start throwing around nuclear weapons.
There's no good time for nuclear weapons, and that includes
No.
the past. They never should have been used in the first place, but that's a totally different conversation.
I have a hard time believing that anybody is going to use nukes.
I wish I shared that optimism.
I sure wish I shared that optimism. See, because I was thoroughly brainwashed as a child during the Cold War, and I'm absolutely like, to me, every day I live is gravy right now because I never thought I'd see the other side of the year 2000. So to me, this is just amazing. But it just sooner or later, as long as these weapons exist, sooner or later, someone will use it. It's as simple as that. It's a matter of time. Sooner or later, someone will be stupid enough to do it. You know.
So we're not going to do it.
Oh no, I think we're probably likely to do it. We're more likely than almost anyone else to do it.
I don't think so.
Uh,
I disagree.
Please
And-
just
and-
listening to our generals
Drop
talk
that one
about
out
it.
there and then not justify it. Where are you coming from?
So I'm listening to a bunch of generals who are eagerly, excitedly talking about the possibility of low yield nuclear weapons, and their reasoning behind this is that because Russia has some low yield nuclear weapons, that we shouldn't be in the position where we can't respond if they use a low.
Okay, but that's different though.
It's
You're talking
not. I'll let me continue. So, in part, we don't currently have anything that is low yield at the moment. And the concern is that we've lost the mutually assured destruction kind of bulwark by not having low yield. It means that if somebody else uses a low yield, then we aren't able to respond without basically destroying the world, which obliterates the concept of mutually assured destruction, because what that means is that somebody can nuke us without being able without the concern of mutual assured destruction. The push to make low yield is also by people who speak quite excitedly about the possibility of first strike capability and having that potential armament in our toolbox. That's not a rational position. That is, these are, I mean, I can't remember the name of the general who's talking about this, but this is the position of a psychopath, and it's in our own military. I have no faith whatsoever that our military has enough restraint or foresight or forethought to consider the possibility that a low yield nuke is not a good idea to develop in the first place, and that we should not be putting ourselves in the position where we expect to respond to other people's low yield.
Okay, so many years ago, the United States military built Davy Crockett's, which is it was just on the tip of my tongue.
Battlefield nuke.
Yeah, I mean, there's a word for tactical. I mean,
Right.
it's a tactical nuke to use on the battlefield.
Right,
Davy Crockett bolts to the back of a truck.
right,
Unless you're really strong and you can hold it. Some
Right.
guys might be strong enough to hold it, but I mean, it bolts to the back of a truck. So it's not like we've never had and that we don't have. We have that capability. I don't think that
we don't have launch capability for
I
it.
don't think. But they're battlefield nukes. You really don't need much as far as
In
here's
this-
the thing:
in
is there's
this
no such thing
consideration-
there's no such thing as mutually assured destruction not existing, because there are enough nukes on the other side that if somebody were to use a low yield nuke and we responded, as you said, somebody would probably, hey, let's blow the shit. They're going to blow us back up anyway.
Right.
So
Yeah.
so the mutually assured destruction is still there.
I'm relaying the insane argument that I heard from a United
But that's
States
the thing, is that they're
general.
insane. I don't think that makes it likely that we would use it. I think it's
I
more
think
likely. I think
Their
it's more likely.
position,
I don't.
position
I
makes
just
it
don't. That
much
doesn't.
more likely.
I mean, it just doesn't That doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't matter if it makes sense.
Because
If somebody
okay,
with
but you're talking
the
about
power to do it.
what the best trained military on the face of the planet may or may not do. And the best trained military is not going to just randomly nuke. They're not going to do it. It's not going to happen. We have a better chance.
Wish I had any
larger
faith
chance.
at all in that position.
Okay, there's a larger chance. Oh, well, I mean, having served, I don't know about you. I've served. I'm pretty sure that there are safeguards. There's a larger chance.
I remember us having the
same
4-digit.
point. You cut me off every time I get to the same point, Jack. You
Okay.
cut me off. There's a much larger chance of Putin feeling cornered and nuking. But even then, that's not even going to be any kind of assurance that his orders will be carried out. It's more likely that he'll order a nuclear strike and that his men won't do it. That is the most likely scenario when it comes to nukes.
No, I don't believe that.
I still can't hear you. Your mic ain't working.
Say something, Joe.
Yeah, no, still can't hear you. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, okay. It's literally happened twice where Soviets were ordered to launch nuclear weapons, and the people in charge who had the responsibility to follow those orders said no. It's happened twice in history. Once during the Cuban Missile Crisis and once in the early 80s.
Well, if you mean the man who saved the world, they didn't order them to fire. He didn't relay the message to his superiors that there were incoming missiles because he knew there must have been something wrong.
I'm talking about actually as a Soviet commander during.
Oh, you're talking about a different incident. Okay, fair enough. I just didn't know if you were conflating that and that. That's all. Welcome, man. It's good to see you. It's been a while. How you been? Yeah, it's going okay.
So I mean, okay. So I guess I'd say this. I mean, the likelihood of us using a nuke before the Russians would is zero. That's not happening.
Well, I don't know. I don't like to have. I wouldn't put it past the United States to use a nuclear weapon in a first strike situation. I don't see that happening in this situation. That's all.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm talking about the current.
Yeah. I don't see that happening in this situation. When George Bush and when Trump were president, I was fucking shaky about it. I have to admit, I was nervous, and it's not because they're Republicans, it's because of their rhetoric. I want to make that clear. It's not about that. But
I will point out though that only Republicans ever have that kind of rhetoric, or at least to that degree that they did.
Maybe, once upon a time, I didn't think the Democrats were such a boner for fucking war. But look what's going on right now. You know what I mean? I mean, I can't get my head around how much basic propaganda I'm seeing on the cable news, pitching to get involved in this war, man. And
I don't know. I don't see that.
Really?
And I'm a news junkie, and I don't see that. I see on the news, I see them talking about staying out of the war. I mean, it's repeated. It's like a mantra. The people don't want it. Biden keeps saying we're not sending troops. We're not getting involved.
Right. We can't.
I'm not talking about the administration. I'm talking about the pundits.
Right. And the only pundits that are pro-war tend to be on the news channels that are new, like OAN and
everywhere I've seen it, again, I've been following this very closely, is every time like they'll bring up a no-fly zone, and what's to say, and they repeat that we can't do it because it risks Americans and Russians in direct combat. And quite frankly, here's the thing: I do not believe that if we had a no-fly zone and we shot down a Russian plane, that's going to result in a nuclear exchange. It's not going to. But the fear is there, both on the NATO allies and in the United States command structure. So it's not. That's why we don't have one.
Yeah, we're not talking about what would happen right now, this second. What we're talking about is what happens after 2 or 3 dominoes fall. Okay, but
we're talking about
an escalating scenario,
right? But we're talking about this conflict that is currently we're not even involved in. We're talking about the conflict in Ukraine and Russia, right? Well, Russia doesn't have the resources to expand this war. Even if they wanted to, The only thing he has left that he could do if he really wanted to expand it is chemical weapons or nuclear weapons. And I don't think it's going to happen, because if he tried, I don't think his people would follow through. Most of his military is bogged down. He can't fuel tanks to get from Moscow to Kiev.
Yeah, I mean,
It's either escalate or
that's the biggest protection we have against some kind of escalation is
Right
really
now, it's
just the
least
incompetence of the Russian military.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's
I
the
mean,
thing.
I don't see I don't see how there could be an escalation, and most of the NATO allies, and some of them want to get in there, and I don't blame them, because they're very close to the action. You know, it's the Slavic states are like,
Yeah, Poland would be in there already if it wasn't for us.
yeah. I mean, they want to get, but as far as like us, we're not getting it. We won't even we won't let another country send them airplanes.
Right.
We won't even let Poland send them airplanes. So, I mean, we are like the furthest from getting involved. We'd be more likely to get involved in a war in Ethiopia.
Now, I will say this: if beyond all likelihood Putin does order chemical or nuclear strike and his people do carry it out, we will get involved in one way or another. That I will say. There's zero chance we're going to let that go unanswered.
And what do you think would be the appropriate response for any level of a nuclear detonation on a sovereign country?
The funny part is, I would not want to retaliate. I would not want to retaliate with a nuclear weapon. Put it that way.
Right. But what would be
Problem
the
is-
appropriate response?
There's too many countries with nuclear weapons, though. So in some ways, it doesn't matter what we think the appropriate response is, because there's other powers.
Well, I think Paul's asking what we as the United States should do.
Yeah. Well, or what we as four individuals here in this group. I mean, what do if you were in charge, what would you do? I mean, honestly, let's just say you had the power to make that call.
Yeah,
And
there were
recommend to the president when he was going to take your recommendation. What would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, there are tons of conventional means we could use to let Russia know that is not going to be acceptable, and then we're not going to let that fall. You're muted, Raven.
So I think that depends. Like, have we said, because maybe I missed it, like, is it just a general use of nuclear weapons, or like, what does he target? What does he do? Does he launch one into the ocean just as a warning? You know what I mean? Like what is the scenario that we're reacting to?
That's the point.
I mean, I hear what you're saying on the one hand, but on the other hand, I mean, if the nuclear detonation is on anything other than a military target, and that's a very loose term, especially to people dropping bombs, yeah. I don't personally see any way out of it without becoming directly involved once that happens. And I just hate to think that that's the trigger that they would pull to get us involved, because my impression of this war seems, and again, I'm just a dude. This is an opinion. There's no way near a fact. Sure. But I think that whether it's Putin trying to drag us in or whatever, I feel very much like this whole war is provocatory to get us involved.
I don't think that
agree.
at all.
I do. Because some of it's not action so much as rhetoric. There's a lot of rhetoric from the Russians that seems like it's designed to piss off Americans.
Piss us off, but I don't think Putin wants us to get engaged. In fact, I think the fact that they've already, just yesterday, the day before, they said now the first stage of the operation is over and now our focus is Donbass. This is basically them, one, realizing that they're not going to get their ultimate goal, and two, trying to save face. But also, I think that's also a signal: don't escalate.
Yeah, Putin has no path to victory at this point, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't do something insane. And
I think at this point it's a war of attrition. Neither one of them is in a good position for victory. Neither one of them. And I think what it looks like, Putin is just going to demolish city after city as long as he can. He's going to turn as much of it into rubble as he can, and the Ukrainians are going to hold on to as much as they can, and then eventually Putin will be out of steam. And I think that's. I'm sorry, there's a baby crying, and I am so distracted.
Yes. Actually, I think he's less likely. The fact that they've restated what their goals are, to me, is a sign that he's not going to escalate. Not with nuclear. Definitely not with nuclear. Chemical, unlikely. But I wouldn't say. I won't say he wouldn't use chemical weapons. But I think nuclear. Plus the fact that what they did with their latest threat to use nuclear weapons was that they would use nukes against anything that threatened the existence of Russia. So basically, as long as we don't make any existential threats to them or anything that they perceive as existential threats, they're not going to use nukes.
Right, and I saw that when that was being reported on the news, and I have to say, in my opinion, the way it was being reported was just really like, I don't know. There's
a lot of excitement
watching
from
it these days.
certain pundits, including ones that I've seen on MSNBC. Like it is not exclusive to OAN or any of the fringe networks. There are people who, at least guests on pretty mainstream programs, who have shown a lot of excitement for some kind of warfare. And again, from our military, there's a lot of people who just really have itchy, well, I'll say balls for, they want to get into a war because there's lots of sort of background motivation to spend military contractor money to,
I think it goes from a different perspective. We're basically 65% of Russia's battalion tactical groups are deployed to Ukraine. So 65% of their entire ground forces. The desire to basically wipe out the bulk of Russia's army fairly easily and fairly quickly is a big motivator to people that are in the military. Now, I think
I agree with that. That's quite likely what's going on with some generals.
Oh yeah. Now there's certainly some people that are looking at a financial perspective, but I mean when we saw that big 40-mile column, I mean I'm on a Twilight 2000. I don't know if you're familiar with the game Twilight 2000. It's based on your survivors from a division that gets wiped out in World War III, and you're trying to survive in post-apocalyptic Poland. So and a lot of people are ex-military, or at least people who are up on military things, and there was multiple times where people posted, pictures, images of those columns, basically pretty much defenseless, saying, "Oh man, just to have a couple wings of A-10s, just wipe that out in about 2 days." So I think and quite frankly, while I'm very unhappy that this war happened, I am happy to see the Russian army get its guts pulled out, and I also am happy to kind of put to bed the idea that Russia is a global power. If it was not for nukes, they would barely be a local power at this point.
If it's not for nukes, though, it is for nukes, and that's part of why they're getting away with all this. And this is the harsh reality. And quite frankly, it's the United States that set this precedent. If you've got nuclear weapons, you can pretty much get away with whatever you want. You can bomb whoever, and no one's really going to be able to stop you.
Well, I think that's anybody who didn't have nukes had that precedent already.
Well, I mean, I take the point you're making, Joe, but I mean, certainly in the past 40 or so years, I mean, it seems really clear to me that the United States has just swaggered around the world and dropped bombs on whoever and said, "Tough titties, too bad." We're doing. I mean, I don't know. We use the exact words "special military operation," but it was something like that for Vietnam. So you know what I mean, and Korea for that matter.
Yeah. I mean, just look at.
Korea was the UN, though. I mean, that was a UN action, though.
Just look at Condoleezza Rice on television talking about how everything Russia is doing is a war crime, and she's might as well be listing the things that she was involved in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah, I get really annoyed at the rehabilitation of people like Condoleezza Rice or Bill Kristol or any of that gang, basically, because
that's why I don't watch them, because whatever they say is completely horseshit anyway, or either that, or even if they say something factual, it's so couched in so much shit, as Jack pointed out. It's like,
Right.
they're
I've always found it useless though to every time there's an action by somebody overseas is doing something they shouldn't be doing, like Putin right now. I think it's useless to just to then list the crimes of the U.S. in the past. Because it was wrong when we did it. It's wrong when they're doing it. Us
No,
doing
yeah,
it
it's not.
doesn't excuse what's happening when somebody else does it. So I think that constantly pointing it out, and it's something I see on Facebook all the time.
There's just certain people who shouldn't get to say it. That's all. You
I get
should
that.
not
I get that.
put
George
Condoleezza Rice
George W. Bush should not be getting on TV anywhere and giving anybody a lecture on national sovereignty.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If George H. was still alive, he might be able to say something about that.
Yeah. But
Because
what pissed me off though, I've run into so many tankies who keep saying that, basically trying to justify what's happening now. I'm like, you know what? And see the thing, and see the thing. To the point, on the one hand, they're like, well, if you were for what the U.S. did now, you're being hypocritical to criticize Russia. Okay. However, if you criticize the United States back then and you're not criticizing Russia now, you're also just as fucking hypocritical.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm very upset with some people on the far left who seem to think I imagine, and I can't really get into their heads about this, but they seem to think that Putin is some reversion of Lenin who's going to restore the Soviet Union. It's that's an insane position. They're even more hyper, oligarchical capitalists than we are. There's not a single aspect of the current Russian economy that is even remotely, Soviet or socialist, or even they're so far from communist it's not even funny. They're hyper capitalist,
Right.
And they're not the good guys.
No, they're not. And plus the fact that, quite frankly, I mean, okay, on paper, the Soviet Union was this, communist, haven, but in reality, it was horrible. I get this not from the media, but from people I know who lived there and moved here and said, holy shit, was that fucking horrible. Because the fact of the matter is, there's always been oligarchs in Russia, even during the Soviet period. There's always been a tiered society where some people had influence and power and privilege, and most people didn't. It was just, again, it was on paper. This is why I've dealt with some of these tankies, and they'll say, well, the Soviet, they'll try to, on the one hand, be pro-Soviet, but the other hand, try to excuse the bad shit that Soviets did and say, well, it wasn't a true communism. I'm like, right. Same thing I say to the ANCAPs, who say, when you bring up Somalia, they say, well, that wasn't a true, right-wing, libertarian anarchy. Like, right, because neither fucking bullshit thing can exist. So, there's a reason why we've never had a true either of those extremes, because they really can't exist.
That's no. I mean, I'm gonna flatly, go against that, because regardless of what the Soviet Union was, the concept, the idea that it proves that the concept can exist is totally erroneous.
It doesn't exist because human beings are still fucked up, and as long as humans remain fucked up, there's going to be, as long as anyone has a position of authority over anyone else, there were going to be people who abuse that authority.
Right. As long as we have hierarchies, and hierarchies are something that naturally occurs in the human population. I don't disagree with any of that. The idea that the few socialist experiments that have failed under great pressure from outside forces represent an absolute end of the line, this can never work, is absolutely
on previous hangs, though, you yourself said it doesn't really scale. That's the problem. It can work on small on isolated.
No, I said anarchism doesn't scale.
Okay.
Anarchism, which as I have said many times, I was a anarcho-socialist, particularly of the Makhnovist flavor. It works very well in particular circumstances, but it doesn't scale to the size of a sovereign nation. You can maybe have a sovereign town that is anarchist or something like that.
Right.
But the idea that socialism, particularly the concept of Soviet socialism, because of course a Soviet is really not that different from the way like the UAW or you know various other unions work. It's essentially a cellular body that is meant to scale. Whether or not the circumstances that the Soviet Union was under, you know, represent like a best case scenario, like they absolutely there was nothing approaching a best case scenario. I would absolutely want to see a nation attempt Soviet style socialism again. And I think that, you know, if the argument is that it will automatically fail, then the best approach would simply to, you know, let it fail, to not attempt to intervene, not to try and undermine it at every possible you know, direction. And if it's naturally going to fail, let the experiment fail. But that's not, you know, what any socialist country has ever experienced. There's never been a socialist country that wasn't under intense outside pressure, particularly by capitalism.
Right, but that outside pressure wasn't always unbidden either, though, because remember, you know, when you did have people that were gonna, in the same way, people tried to spread, you know, capitalism by means of violence. There have been people in every example I can think of the nations that attempted it have also tried to spread, you know, their version of socialism by violence as well. So it basically, you know, that's what I'm saying.
I don't know. I mean, you have Bolivia, which is not has no history of like being an aggressive nation, has only ever been sort of assaulted from the outside, has attempted, probably one of the better examples of a nation that has tried to be as, you know, friendly to its neighbors, accepting and negotiable with of any nation. And yet, you know, Bolivia has been under constant assault from the outside, particular from American capitalism, you know, for its entire history. So there are certainly contexts in which I think you can point out aspects of Soviet-style socialism that would work if given a little bit more breathing room, and not in now. I mean, the biggest problem, of course, is capitalism is based on competition, and if you have a system that will forever be looking for essentially victims of its, you know, of its conquest and imperialism, you're never going to have a Soviet or a socialist country that is simply left alone by capitalism.
Well,
capitalism can't do that.
I will have to. I am not as up on the history of Bolivia as you, so I will have to do some. I'll do some research on Bolivia, and then next time we have the opportunity, we'll talk more about it.
Okay.
Couldn't say fairer than that. But as regards what's going on, Stower, in the breadbasket of Europe, which is Ukraine, even if they stopped hostilities tomorrow, that country's totally smashed. I mean, maybe not totally smashed, but Mariupol is particularly, it's wiped, right? And I'm sure there's other cities I've seen other places which have had serious devastation. So even with that, even if you want to set aside the cynicism about the military-industrial complex wanting to cash in on a war, to quote Led Zeppelin, the pain of war cannot exceed the woe of aftermath. Right? Because putting shit back together, millions of people are going to be coming back home to nothing.
Yeah.
And so rebuilding Ukraine, that's a whole different set of contractors. Who should get those jobs, fellas and Raven? Who should get these jobs? Because, I mean, Russia's probably going to want to do it, right?
The locals as much as possible, because their economy is going to need that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they're going to be the ones actually doing the work for sure, but who's going to be pouring that money in and actually, you know, I don't know.
That is a real question for the aftermath of this, because obviously it should be Russia that pays for it. But how do you cause that to happen?
As far as I'm aware, the only time reparations are ever paid is when someone loses the war, right? So if they're not going to declare that they've lost under any circumstances, right? You know, so
right, we're not going and we're not going to conquer them to make that happen. So
Yeah, and it would be very easy to set up a post-World War Germany scenario where you make Russia is already going to be impoverished by this war because of the international sanctions and everything else, and then to have them pay for the war on top of that, which they absolutely should, or at least their government should, is going to cause some real tremendous anxiety for the Russian people, and cause a serious potential for the next type of rise of a fascist movement in Russia. One of the things that really bothers me about this, and even bothers me about the idea of A-10 strafing lines of Russian tanks, is that those are mostly kids in those vehicles. Most of them, or many of them, were sent into Ukraine imagining they were on a humanitarian rescue mission. The Russian people are going to be suffering just absolutely tremendously because of these sanctions. And Putin does not have fortunes big enough to pay reparations for this. And it's going to be taken out of the hide of the Russian people, most of whom are innocent and are, many who aren't propagandized are opposing this war and would never have wanted it had they known the full extent. And I feel just as much empathy for them as I do for the Ukrainians who are on the receiving end.
I do, to a point. You're right. There's a lot of people in Russia who are totally against this. They're not propagandized, and they want no part of this. And I feel very horrible for them because there's nothing they can do. I mean, there's lots of them going out there and still protesting, risking prison, and who knows what else. And I actually know this guy. Tomorrow is Steve Shive's monthly hangout, and this guy Vlad. I hope he makes it. He's in Russia. He was in the last one, and he was definitely against it. But with everything with social media being blocked and all this, we don't know, if he's going to be able to make an appearance.
It's super impressive that literally over 10,000 Russians have knowingly got themselves arrested and knowing they're facing possible 15 years in jail. And quite honestly, like that woman who did the thing on the TV with the sign behind the presenter, they disappeared. Her lawyers couldn't even find her. I don't know. Did she ever turn back up or not?
She did. They had her in court a couple of days later. So, but then I'm not sure about after that. But here's the one thing though. So, leaving aside the people who are against Putin and certainly against this war, even the people who might have been for Putin but against this war. Prior to all this, Putin is very popular in their country.
Well,
and here's your thing, because let me finish, Jack.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So, in the same way that all the Americans that have been for all the shit that America has done that America ought not to have done, bear some culpability in that. So the same is true of Russia. So if you were for all George Bush's bullshit, and we went out and did bad things in name of the citizens, again, for leaving out the people who were against it, because obviously they did their best and they weren't successful. But the rest of us who, if we were for it or didn't speak up or were indifferent, we bear some culpability, not fault necessarily, but culpability. And I know it's become popular in the last 20 years or so to to kind of separate out the people, but at a certain point, the people have to be responsible for their leaders.
It's a very different set of circumstances for the average Russian citizen. I'm speaking about a couple of Russian friends I have who I've talked to online, who even on relatively, there's no such thing as a secure communication apps, but on relatively secure communication apps are resistant to directly criticizing Putin, even though they're very against Putin. Mm-hmm. You cannot tell anything about the Russian people's feelings about Vladimir Putin from any poll that has ever been
I agree.
published in the West. And so it's very difficult to know really, because Russia has a particularly, the Soviet Union created an interesting history of sort of mistrust among the people. One of the reasons the military is failing so hard is because in the response to the incredible amount of public surveillance, or lack of privacy that people had under the Soviet Union, followed by the naked sort of like dog eat dog ultra capitalist world that has occurred in the last 30 years. Russian people don't trust one another very much, almost unlike any other country that we've known in modern history, where people sell out their neighbors, and there's a deep lack of sort of, there are two stories that everybody kind of maintains: their public face and the thing that they might not even share with each other in their own family. And so it's very complicated to say what the Russian people want or believe or anything else, because even amongst one another, they're very unlikely to express with their full chest what they actually believe and feel.
Fair enough, but I mean, at a certain point, like, I always have to wonder, okay, so how do people like him get there in the first place? Like I know there's a lot of Germans after World War II, like, oh, we didn't know, or this, that, and the other thing, we couldn't do anything. I'm like, you elected the guy, and he wrote, and in the case of Hitler wrote a book and said, well, he was going to kill the Slavs and kill the Jews and all this kind of stuff. And then people play, then after the fact, and I'm not talking about your friends, because I'm sure that you wouldn't be associating with people that would ever countenance the kind of person he is. But there's a lot of just like I talked about this before. They were like during the 2016 election cycle, people that were like critical of Hillary voting for the Iraq War, and then find out they were for the Iraq War too. I'm like, oh wow, isn't that convenient? So now that it didn't work out well, or you found out that it wasn't really a good thing to have done, now you're retroactively hating what you were told her to do. And so I have a hard time with it. And again, I'm not saying it's the exact same situation with Russia now as it was with Germany, or Russia to say 20 years ago with Germany. But I remember, and Paul will recognize the line: people don't seize power, they're given power.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, I've talked about this before, my interest in the way in which sociopaths seem to be funneled upward into positions of power. There is definitely a flaw in the human psychology of any nation across the board, that we do seem to want to put sociopaths in charge of all of our biggest institutions, all the institutions that have the most power over our lives. I don't think that's a Russian exclusive problem. That is absolutely, I mean, just looking at every corporation and military, in the United States, we have the same exact.
Well, and a good example here is on the I'm not saying exclusively, but particularly in the right wing in the United States.
Yeah.
So you have, on one hand, people that are hyper into freedom and individuality, who are very, very readily looking for a strong man to turn everything over to. Right. And that juxtaposition, it's so bizarre. Like, you're so hyper, anti-government and anti-rules and laws, but you're willing to turn over to this autocrat who will take away, basically defy the rule of law and all this. And I think there's a certain part about it, and I said this ages ago: people making choices requires a certain level of responsibility, right? So if you make a choice and it's the wrong choice, well, again, you have some culpability for the outcome. I think at a certain level, people like the idea. They like the idea of having that choice, but they don't really want the responsibility that goes with those choices. And even sometimes people who make choices then later try to eschew the responsibility for the bad outcome that happens later. And so I think what happens is that, so if you have somebody who says the thing that you want to say but can't say. That strong. We kind of view, for some reason, we view sociopaths as strength, even though they tend to be some of the most like frail, insecure people around. But they're willing to act as though they're
Right.
secure, and they will step on whoever they basically don't care, because they don't have that empathy that most of us have for other people. And so I think we get a sense of comfort that, well, it's taken care of. I don't have
Right.
to think. I don't have to choose. I want the illusion of choice, but I really want to give it over to that guy so I don't have to be responsible for what happens next.
Yeah, I think that's a large part of it. But we also have one of the better definitions I've ever heard describing sort of the right-wing character, or the nature of conservatism, is that it is hierarchy maintenance.
So,
And
Joe, I wanted to just jump in real quick, and I wanted to say, while you were saying all of that before, I actually kind of heard Loki's speech in Berlin.
right, yeah, that is, and one of the brilliant things about you're absolutely right. That is exactly what he's saying, is that you don't want this burden of responsibility. You want me, the sociopath.
So
Clearly,
freedom dulls your life. It gets in the way of you living. You don't want that. You don't want freedom.
yeah, that's absolutely true. And those who are on the far right, or the very strongly conservative, believe that hierarchism is essentially a good, and that people who are forceful and in charge and controlling of others are doing it in the best interest of everyone. And obviously that's simply not the case for sociopaths. There is no such thing as for everyone.
And one thing that pissed me off, and this is something I've heard before, and I heard it again last night. Well, today actually, I don't watch Bill Maher's show anymore. Occasionally, I'll watch clips. And so there was a thing about Zelensky and how, he said, well, you can't be against toxic masculinity, but then like the strong guy. I'm like, well, my argument would be that Zelensky is not toxic, or at least not for the most part. Anyway, not to the degree. But there's a difference between being a strong and being a bully.
Yeah.
But the thing is that but he basically saying, well, he was using the thing like, well, maybe it's not so hot, but humans have basically, the idea is humans have achieved everything they have because of toxic people. And I disagree. I think actually toxic people have gotten in the way of the progress, not facilitated.
I don't think it's either or myself. I think it's both. I mean, like, the toxic parts of masculinity, I think, are worth objecting to. But, I also think that the whole topic is oversimplified and misunderstood by so many people, because there's this whole conflation of all masculinity being toxic, which I think is what Bill Maher's trying to argue against. And I'm not trying to defend Bill Maher, because I fucking watched that clip. I didn't watch the whole show, but I watched that clip. And I was seething from it, because he's just so full of straw man arguments. It's just ridiculous.
Right.
But I mean, some of the greatest achievements in human history, I know I keep talking about Egypt, right? But I mean, you look at all that shit that they did back then. And there was, those pharaohs, their whole point was to put their mark on everything. That's the most toxic masculinity I can think of, right? They wanted to put their mark on so that we're still saying their name today. And it worked.
Right. However, unlike what we used to believe, the people who built those pyramids were not slaves.
Right.
It was actually an honored position.
Right.
So that's the thing. So because the people that are pro sociopath would say, oh, well, see, it was necessary to enslave people to build all this thing. No, actually, volunteers said, hey, you know what? That's a pretty cool idea. Let's do that.
Well, there's another. Sorry, go ahead.
So what's interesting about Zelensky, and that's what we started off with this, was him being, whether or not he was toxic, right? How Bill Maher is saying, if you're against toxic masculinity, but there's this strong man. Zelensky is not a strong man. If anybody paid any attention before the war, and actually before Donald Trump was in office, and I'm not one of them because I didn't pay attention. But what I found out was that Zelensky, this part I knew, was an actor. He was a comedian. What I didn't know was he did a show about a history teacher becoming president. I watched it. I watched 10 episodes of it. It's fascinating. It's fantastic. Um, it's Russian language. It's Russian and Ukrainian. It's so you gotta read the subtitles, and I'm not one for subtitles. And
with
I
a
watched
few
10
fun
episodes.
moments in English, like when he speaks with Angela Merkel.
Yes, yes, that was great. That was really and but I mean the show is fascinating, and it's the kind of humor Americans would find funny. It's almost like an American show in Russian.
It's like Veep or something. It's a similar premise to Veep.
It's a fantastic show, and I mean it's here he is, this history teacher who became president, not really meaning to, and he's being faced with these problems of the head of state. And in reality, in real life, right after the show, this comedian became the president and is facing these head of state type problems. And the reality, Zelensky is doing a better job than the history teacher Zelensky, and the history teacher did a pretty good job himself. This isn't a strong man president. He's a man of the people.
Right. And he's reacting to a set of nearly impossible circumstances.
Right.
And it's unquestionable that he has made mistakes in this, but I think in each of these cases, I can't imagine doing, for a human being who is fallible, doing a much better job. Which isn't to say that I think Zelensky is perfect or that his ideology is great on every level. There's lots of things you can criticize him for, but in terms of the feet of clay of a human being operating given the circumstances, I think he's doing as good a job as could be expected of basically anybody.
Yeah. I mean, he is not a politician. He has not been doing this a very long time. He was elected in 2016.
That's why Trump thought he could play Zelensky.
And he failed. And now Zelensky is facing his country being bombarded by its longtime neighbor.
We're also seeing something kind of tragic, just in a sort of human kind of way of this very funny, jokey person who is having layer by layer that sort of level of humanity stripped away from him as he becomes this, not really a wartime president. Like, wartime is the wrong term. A besieged people during an attempted occupation and assault.
One of the things that I after watching the show, one of the things that crossed my mind was he was elected right before Trump. The Ukraine elected an entertainer president at the same time that we did, and they had very different results.
Yes.
Very, very different results. Like you said, Jack, he's not perfect, and he's made mistakes, and some of his ideological, they might be problematic. I don't know enough about him to know, but I mean, he's a person.
So, can I ask the group, what's your opinion of Zelensky's repeated calls for the no-fly zone? I mean, what is that all about? Because this has been refused, and I mean, he has to know that it can't happen. So, what's that all about?
I think, if I were in his position, I can't imagine doing anything else. The thing that you are experiencing is your country being flattened from the air. The only thing that can potentially stop that from happening is a no-fly zone, which NATO and Europe and the United States are never going to provide. That doesn't mean you ever stop asking for it.
Yeah, I think so. I think the other thing, I think it's a bargaining chip also. It's basically, okay, I'm going to ask for this thing I know you're not going to give me, but maybe you'll give me,
something.
Yeah. One thing he did do that and Raven saw it, I posted on Facebook that it annoyed me a little bit, was like he made, and this was the day after Congress voted for an additional $800 million in both military and humanitarian aid, and he's going out there saying, "Well, if you guys don't help me, you guys don't help Ukraine, then basically he was saying basically it's a moral failing of the West." Like, dude, we just voted like a whole bunch of extra money for you. Like don't spit in our face,
I doubt that was a directed like, because he's saying a blanket statement that covers all of NATO and Europe and any other part of the world, and one country that happens to be in that basket did vote very recently. I don't.
Well, we weren't the only ones though. Germany agreed after years and years and years of all the NATO members are supposed to be spending 2% of their GDP on their defense, and Germany's chronically been below that. Well, they basically, they still have to vote on it, but basically it's past the first hurdle where they basically said, yeah, we're going to double our defense budget so we can deal with the current thing and also put ourselves in a better footing going forward. So it's like, yeah, it's not like it's being ignored. That was my only thing. I was like, dude, really? I mean, I get you're going to ask for stuff because you need to, like you said, I agree with you, Jack. I think he needs to ask every day for that no fly. He's never going to get it, but he should keep asking for it. If nothing else, it's like because he also asked then for like the 10,000, for 1,000 missiles a day. He's not going to get that either, but he might get 500 missiles a day. Mm-hmm. I don't think we'd actually be able to give him 1,000 missiles a day. I don't think there's enough stocks and production capacity is high enough that we could actually give him 1,000 missiles a day, not without depleting our own ability to maintain. But yeah, this is he's trying to get as much for his nation as he can, and that's the right thing to do.
One of the recent things that were said about talks, or going to be talks, and they're talking about like negotiations. And I don't know if it was Zelensky himself or someone in his administration said, "Yeah, don't misunderstand this. We're going to be there to negotiate Russia's withdrawal."
Right.
And for an administration that is facing a month now of bombardment where their cities are crumbling and their people are dying, to still have that, you're getting nothing. We're here to negotiate. You're leaving. That's it. If you're not leaving, we're not talking.
Especially now that the Ukrainians over the last 2 days have actually been recovering ground, been gaining ground and pushing the Russians out.
Oh yeah. And captured an entire battalion of Russian tanks.
Right.
It's now that has a lot to do, as I was saying before, about Russia being a society of a extreme, incredible lack of interneighboral trust.
Right.
One of the reasons that the Russian military has failed so badly is because there are people who, before the invasion, were literally selling munitions under the table and emptying the tanks of gasoline, because it is every Russian for themselves for the past 30 years. And this is the consequence of that level of anti-reciprocity, in a culture, is that nobody.
That's exactly the path that Donald Trump put this country on.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly. If and I'm not going to say our ship has been righted. I don't believe it has been. I think QAnon is too much of a force. I think there's too much happening in this country. There's too much distrust of the government and of each other. But we're not there. We're not there. But we're heading there. That's the path that Donald Trump put us on. Yeah. So hopefully, that's something that can be rectified. But if not, that's the future of the U.S.
Now, we're talking about some potential negotiations for the future, and that's ultimately how this is going to have to be resolved. It just the powers that are involved want to have the best position to do so from. I think that's all, but it's never going to be unless they actually kill Zelensky or something with a strike that wipes out a whole building or whatever. I don't know, but you know what I mean. I don't see that this is going to end militarily. At all. It's just going to be negotiated, which is true for lots of conflicts, right? And what really bugs me, and I know it's way too late to really even talk about it, but I'm like, before the Iraq War, there was a year-long discussion about trying to not let the war happen in the UN, and that there was a full court press to stop the war from happening. before the war happened. Fucking Russia was building up on the border for what, 2 months, 3 months before they actually started rolling over it. I mean, I know there wasn't no negotiations, but I didn't see anything like the full court press that happened before the Iraq War, which should have happened. I think there should have been more of an effort to stop this before it started.
Remember, just before we went away, just before we stopped having these for a while, what did I say? If we put, air units, ground units, whatever, if we had said, hey, look, we're going to defend Ukraine because that's what we told them that we were going to do back in '94 and showed up, this never would have happened.
There's, I think, across the board, left, right, and center, there was the belief, and I think it was a fairly justified belief for many people, that the entire thing was always a bluff on the part of Putin. There were
Not me, anyway.
A good number of people, the vast majority of people believed that it would be, this buildup is part of a attempt to scare people into, giving him some concessions on NATO and some other things. And they did underestimate sort of the general, psychopathy of Putin.
I agree with what Jack's saying. I will say, remember, I did go on record because remember we did talk about, I don't know if you were in that particular hangout, Jack, but I said flat out, I said, this is a test. I don't think it was a bluff. I think it was a test. He's basically going to see if we show that we're committed to actually defending Ukraine with military forces, he will not enter. If we don't, he's going to enter. And I'm on record as saying that. Now, the other thing I'm on record of saying, not so much. Well, maybe I don't know if I said it in Hangout, but I know I said it in comments on Bo the Fifth Column. Is everybody was saying, yeah, like Ukraine's going to get wiped away, and I said I don't think so. I said that the reason why I didn't think so, and I didn't think the Russians were going to do this badly. But what I did say was I was looking at the ground forces numbers, and I'm like, okay, the Russia's got about 70% of their ground forces arrayed to invade. That's 180, 190,000. Ukraine's got about 170,000 ground forces. That's not big enough a disparity, especially considering that the defender generally has the advantage. I said the big difference is Russia could commit about 1,200 aircraft to this, and Ukraine's got like 100, and that was going to be the difference.
One of the things that I think very few people noted
I wasn't actually finished.
Sorry, go ahead.
But so I really felt like it really came down to the Air Force. Like if the Russian Air Force didn't commit, then Ukraine would have a chance to fight them off and hold the line, or at least keep them from taking the whole country. Basically, the Russian Air Force has not been much of a factor beyond the first couple of days.
Right. One of the factors that I didn't see anybody consider is how much of the Russian military was dependent on their train system to deliver their vehicles to the front, and how that gave them a completely unrealistic idea of how well they would mobilize once they crossed the border, because it was very easy for Russia to put things on the border, but once they crossed the border, there was essentially no way to move things beyond that, other than through these ridiculous, like, thin columns of tanks that were super susceptible to fuel shortages and everything else.
Well, especially considering that mud season, they attacked. I mean, they attacked during mud season, so the normally tracked vehicles have a big advantage on open terrain. They can run and they can do everything, but they couldn't because the terrain and the weather wouldn't allow it.
Failed to learn the lesson
of Russia.
Napoleon and Hitler both learned.
Yeah.
Don't attack Russia in the winter.
Yeah. Well, that was the other thing about why people believed that Putin was bluffing, is because it was so late in the season. I think it's also not been mentioned enough that global warming has played a role here. What Putin might have imagined there would still be frozen ground at the time of the beginning of this invasion, but we don't live in that world anymore.
That's right. That's a good point. Now, to add on to what you said before about, why Russia's army, one of the reasons why their army is so bad, and it's the distrust. The other thing, and I guess it's maybe a part of that, is that Putin has spent the last 20 years spending a large portion of his military, fairly small military budget by U.S. standards, on prestige projects. So one of that is like a third of their money goes to their nuclear program to try to maintain their nukes, and basically they still don't spend enough for the amount of nukes they have. They still don't spend enough to properly maintain them. If push came to shove, and mind you, I hope we never ever find out, but based on our own experiences, with the amount of money they spend on maintaining their nuclear force, if they actually had to go for a full release, a large number of those weapons either wouldn't launch, or if they did get off the ground, the warheads wouldn't reach their destination, and if they did, they wouldn't detonate or would fizzle and wouldn't be fully effective. Again, I don't ever want to find out. I don't want to test that, but that's based on our own experiences and other nuclear nations' experiences of what it takes to actually maintain it. Another third of their budget has been on these development projects where they basically took planes and ships from the Soviet era and basically have tried to make them as good as, or maybe even better than what the West has. So they spent tons and tons of money on the Su-57 and the Su-35 and the Su-31 and the MiG-31 and all these different things. But like I remember before the war, when I was saying I'm not convinced that that Russia's going to wipe Ukraine away, and people were like, "Oh, but you got to look at this weapon system and that weapon system." And then I looked up the numbers, and they have 14 Su-57s, 10 of which are prototypes, and the other 4 are in service. And they have like 20 of the, and like the Armata tank, the T-14 Armata, which is supposedly like the best tank in the world on paper. They have 14. They have 24 of them. That wasn't going to be a game changer in this conflict. So the idea that but they spent all this money to try to make these things, and they're also maintaining a force larger than they can really maintain with the amount of money that's left over. If they had a smaller military, but had a really professional military, none of this 1-year conscription bullshit, and they actually trained up an NCO corps, and actually, and like I remember seeing multiple generals talking about flight hours, and also pilots talk about flight hours. The average Russian pilot gets 8 flight hours a month, when just to maintain the minimum basic, you need like 30.
Right.
So, and really 40 to 50 is better. And our guys get close to 100. So these guys, even their best pilots are garbage. And that's probably why the Air Force has not been a factor. They basically, they spent a lot of money on aircraft and nothing on pilots.
Right.
So this is what they're in. So they basically, it's a paper tiger that they have all these fancy things, and some people were starting to say, oh well, they're sending their worst out forward. We're seeing the latest mod T-72s and the latest T-80s and T-90s, and they're all junk littering the landscape in Ukraine.
Yeah, I agree with what Deep Ashtray just said in the chat. That the problem for Putin is, of course, if you funnel all those funds and resources into the actual personnel, there's so much corruption that all that money just bleeds away, and it doesn't actually result in better training or anything else. And
no. Well, but on top of that, though,
between running a corrupt government and being a successful military strategist and commander, right? I mean, he clearly fancied himself as one. And it's not just him that doesn't seem to be one. It's quite a few of the people under him as well. And I think that's because they're, whether it's people on the ground, I mean, a lot of Russians have just said, no, we're not doing this, and given up their equipment and then let the Ukrainians seize it and whatever, and I think it's because they can see on the face of it that there's no reason for what they're doing.
Well, the other thing too, like you said, okay, you get a despot, and this is true of all despots. Despots don't like to be told no. And people who basically don't have to have limits, or they basically work things out that they don't ever face limits, start to believe that limits don't exist.
Right.
A friend of mine years ago asked me, because I talked when Abu Ghraib broke, and obviously there's a huge stain on America, and so I said, well, we were talking about torture, and the fact that like my position is that if you want to be the good guy, you can't torture, because torture is a method that is not justifiable beyond the fact that it doesn't work. But even if it did work, it still wouldn't be justifiable.
Right.
And so I said to him, I said, that's the difference between very often the difference between being the good guy and the bad guy is not motivation, it's methods, it's means, is what you're willing to do to achieve your goals. And so he said, my friend said to me, so well, then how does good ever win when the bad guy is willing to, he's able to, he doesn't have limits, so he can just do whatever. And where you have this, you got some at least certain limits, maybe, that you have to abide by. I said, it generally comes down to hubris, because those people at the top who basically operate without limits believe limits don't exist. And they start to believe that if they want something, that it should happen, and if it doesn't, it's not their own fault for asking for something that's impossible. It's the people underneath them, and then they wipe those people out. And the people who say no, they get rid of them. Not because I was watching the thing the other day about Soviet aircraft development. What turned out one aircraft, and I forget which one it was. That might have been the MiG-21. Turned out to be a fairly good Soviet aircraft, but the guy who did the initial design, maybe it was an earlier one, but anyway, whatever aircraft it was. But anyway, he was behind schedule. He told Stalin, I can do X, Y, Z, and he didn't do it in the time frame that Stalin expected it. So the guy was declared an enemy of the state and executed for treason.
Right.
But then a follow-on person picked up the same exact work and actually made it work and turned it into something valuable. But because that guy effectively was telling Stalin no, because Stalin said, I want it Thursday, and he couldn't deliver it Thursday. And so this is that hubris what ends up happening. So eventually they only have yes men, and the yes men are desperate to not say no. Did you see that thing that happened about a month before the invasion?
Oh, yeah.
Where the one I forget what under minister it was, but the guy said something that was kind of contrary, and Putin was like, "Excuse me," and then the guy was like, "Oh," and then he had to like totally backtrack because he realized he put his foot in his mouth, and now he was going to suffer for it.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure I understand. You're saying that the world doesn't operate in such a way that you can just do what you want and get what you want?
Yes.
Not long term anyway.
Anybody?
And this is actually, again, you made the parallel with Trump, right? How did Trump act? It doesn't matter what the law is. I want this to happen a certain way. What do you mean you can't? What do you mean you can't usurp the election? I just fucking told you to. If you were strong, you would do it, even though it's illegal and you don't have the power to do it.
I just now have to just reorganize my entire life now.
Yeah, I mean, there's all these things work really well short term. Almost anyone, Trump proved this, is like, he's this sort of comic, Mel Blanc character who is running off the edge of the cliff, and just barely staying ahead of the bridge or whatever that's collapsing out from under him. And you can do that for longer than you would expect, but it is not possible to do it forever. And
I just wanted to change the subject and ask y'all: have y'all seen the $1 billion house that Vladimir Putin built?
I think I saw a picture of it from the air.
I seen like I guess it must have been a drone flying through the house or something, because it was like a pretty good, like continuous nonstop shot, and also edited shots in as well. But I mean, it's so obscene. I mean, I palaces in general a bit obscene, But
dictators free themselves but enslave the people. Charlie Chaplin. Well,
I mean, it's got like multiple tennis courts and swimming pools and bowling alleys and cinemas and fucking, I can't even remember how many different, bedrooms and other rooms. It's just ridiculous.
And again, more hubris, right? Because I'm the big important guy. I deserve $1 billion fucking house. A $500 million house wasn't good enough.
Right.
In a country that's starving to death because of corruption.
Well, I mean, in Russia, they've got examples of extreme hubris from the czars. The Winter Palace in St. Petersburg is legendarily one of the most ornate buildings in the world. And So they've got that example to compete with. I don't really think tennis courts and multiple swimming pools in a cinema really competes with the Winter Palace myself. That's just me.
I'm curious what the Winter Palace would cost in today's dollars.
It's unfathomable.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the big problem with the czars is like I mean, there's a reason why people wanted a revolution.
Right. Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, that's when despotism gets to that point, I mean, I think it says in the Declaration of Independence, mankind will suffer evils as long as evils are sufferable, but there will come a point when they're no longer sufferable. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's pretty much
Winter Palace, $6.44 billion between the structure and all the treasures in it.
Yeah. So yeah, only 6.4 times what Putin was able to spend.
And here's one thing I wonder, because obviously, the Russian state media can lie about how many Russian soldiers are dead and wounded, but there's a whole bunch of guys who are either not going to come home, or they're going to come home in bags, or they're going to come home in pieces, and that's going to be a lot harder to hide.
Yeah.
And I wonder, I mean, I hope it has an impact on Russian society. I really do. I really hope that is a tipping point where people just get enough. Like you said, when do they reach that point where it's unbearable?
Well, the concern I always have is that when a society, particularly a capitalist society, begins to fall apart, that it has a couple of directions to go, and the more likely option is generally fascism. It's easier for that type of society to transition to fascism than it is to have something that is more humanitarian.
When we're watching that in slow motion right now, as far as I can tell, because I mean, there's really not been a full court press to stop the voter suppression and other shenanigans the Republicans have been doing since the last election. And more importantly, the Democrats have not been able to deliver on Build Back Better. And there's a lot of disillusionment, I think, with people who would typically vote for the left. Meanwhile, the other side's quite energized, and it's terrifying, and this is why last night, and don't think that democracy would survive a Trump presidency if Trump got elected again.
No, I don't think so either.
No, I don't think it did survive his first election. I mean, frankly, I don't think it survived George W. Bush.
You mean because the Supreme Court ruled for him to be president, basically, because he didn't actually win.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've had something of a zombie democracy for a very long time that has, maybe some of the characteristics of people control on a very local level, but in terms of our federal government, we're not really operating on something that could reasonably be called a democracy.
Jack, I hereby task you with the mission of writing the song "Zombie Democracy." That's brilliant. What genre would it be? Would it be punk or would it be what? Metal?
No, I would do a folk song.
I was thinking that too. Yeah, folk song.
Yeah, it's got to be sort of Woody Guthrie. I might even throw some bluegrass sort of sound in there.
Yeah,
I'm actually writing it down right now. No, for my personal characteristic, I would probably write it as hip hop, because that's sort of my as in writing
as a man from the streets.
Well, I mean, as I've said before, I had a brief sort of hip hop career back in early 2000. So
I'm just teasing.
Yeah. Do those videos exist anywhere online?
No. I did, get on stage quite a lot for, various open mics and stuff, but no video that I'm aware of.
Damn.
Well, Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on from Ukraine and Putin because I think we spent like an hour talking about that or more now. So, Joe, have you got anything else that you'd like to talk about, Ketanji, or anything else like that you might like to bring up? Because it was a bit of a circus this week with all that.
Well, about Catan. Well, actually, I thought you were going to say about because it was obviously it's been a long time. My mom died.
Oh my goodness, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a bit of a shock. I mean, it was one of those things that wasn't a shock, but was, if you know what I mean. Like, last time I saw my mom, she wasn't looking that great, and but then she was supposed to go see the oncologist to see if they were going to do another battery of chemo, because the first battery she did really well, and she was it was receding and everything was looking wonderful, and then there's usually they stop, especially at someone her age, they stop and they kind of wait to see if you need another battery or not, and then it came back with a fucking vengeance, and like worse than ever. The lesions were all over her and all this kind of stuff, and she was in a lot of pain, and then so she was supposed to go to see the oncologist to decide what they were going to do, and so a doctor called me to say on February 1st to say, well, if we were going to have her go to the oncologist, but because she's gotten kind of frail the last day or two, so we think it's better for them to just do a remote session rather than transport her. We don't think it'd be good for her. So I said, okay, that's fine. And they said, and so the doctor told me that if the oncologist says no to chemo, then we're going to suggest hospice care, which that's into the line for most of the time anyway. Mm-hmm. So I knew it was coming, but literally 12 hours later, I got a call in the middle of the night, and one of someone doing the rounds found her and said that she was gone, and it was just like, so I was upset because it was clear that the end was coming, but the impression I got from the doctor that it would be months or at least weeks, if not months, not hours or minutes. And so I didn't go. If I'd known, I would have run out to see her that night, but I didn't. And the thing that pissed me off the most is the guy calls me up. It's like 3:30 in the morning, and of course there's literally nothing you can do about it at 3:30 in the morning. So call me at 3:30 in the morning was like, all you did was wake me up and upset me in the middle of the night, and now I'm awake and I can't do anything about it. Right. Everything's closed. And then he wants to know like what funeral home. Like, I don't fucking know. It's 3:30 in the fucking morning, you asshole. What's wrong with you? He's like giving me 20 questions, and it's like, that's something we talked about, because again, I didn't think it was that imminent, so I hadn't made any arrangements. And then I went back to sleep, and he called like 2 hours later. I'm like, listen, motherfucker, stop fucking calling me. I'll call you when I wake up. And then I finally woke up, and then I think I got another hours of sleep. I got up, I made arrangements, and then they finally called back, and I told them, I said, look, I want to sanction that guy. Someone should sanction that guy, because what was the point? It didn't accomplish it. Like, she's not going to come back. It's not like I can rush. It's one thing she was dying, and I could rush there and hold her hand while she dies. There was nothing I could do. Right. And so there was no fucking point in waking me up. And the worst of it is, I got to bed late, so I was only on like an hour and a half of sleep as it was. So that thinks I'm all disoriented and everything. So then we took care of that. But I still haven't done the memorial yet. I mean, part of it was we were still in Omicron. And I didn't want to do the whole sitting in a mortuary and the usual drab shit. I want to do a celebration of my mom's life, and kind of a combination Irish wake and Jewish shiva. My mom was a quarter Ashkenazi and half Irish, so kind of appeal to the ancestral traditions and kind of do something more positive with it. But I was really kind of fucked up for like a good month, and now I'm just trying to get back in the swing of things, and so I still haven't caught up with it. And
well, I'm really sorry, Joe. I'm really sorry. My mom is diminishing right now, and it's not easy to participate and watch. And I feel you, man. I do.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So that's been my last 2 months.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what's kept me away. I've been out in California, trying to help my mom and everything, and just spend whatever time she has left, spend as much of it as I can with her, of course. But at the same time, I do have the life to live. I'm doing back and forth stuff, but anyway, and it's
Well,
interesting. It's interesting because in my family, my grandfather had congestive heart failure diagnosed in 1965, but he didn't die until 1980. Even though in 1965 they gave him like 2 or 3 years to live, and he used to say to me all the time when I was growing up that he wanted to live long enough to see me and my sister grow up. And I was 18 when my granddad died, so I guess that he managed to. And it's all up here. My natural father had cancer 5 times, and the 5th time it was pancreatic cancer, which can't be cured. But he went through the process anyway to try to whatever. And he fought like hell. And my mom, she's been, I suppose, privileged to have a very charmed life, and because she has such a joie de vivre, she hangs on like a drowning man. You know what I mean? And that's just how it is. It's partly beautiful and it's also partly sad because her heart is failing, her lungs are failing, and she's got acute diabetes. So like. And the doctor says to her, it's a miracle you've made it this far, and it's all up here, because but there comes a point which your heart will not function or your lungs will no longer function. All the goodwill in the world can't keep you alive forever. Otherwise you'll be 300-year-old people.
Right. The thing that's I guess it's really like it's how we end, right? Like what are the circumstances? How do we live, and what are the circumstances that around our death? One of the things that hurt a lot was there was a I'm on I'm doing all the DNA and all that kind of stuff. Well, 23andMe, the week my mom died, 23andMe added tribal identification, which for Black people is huge because we don't know, most of us don't know any of that stuff. And so it was like 2 days after she died, I got this notification, and I went and I actually found out, and my first thought was, I got to tell Mom. She's not there, because even though that's not her heritage, she would have been excited for me, when we were having a discussion about it, because something I know she always hoped for me that I would be able to find that out.
Yeah, you'll take little hits like that over and over again for some time. That's just the nature of it, bereavement. Yeah. Heck, you probably still get that thinking about your dog, Joe. So yeah.
Because that's the thing is, we have, I think I told you we have two new dogs now, and they're wonderful. But it's interesting is that I love both of them, and they're both really cool in their own ways. But it doesn't at all take away the loss of the other two.
Of course, yeah.
And it kind of fills your heart in a way that you don't feel. It helps you get through it, but it doesn't go away. It's still there.
Right. Yeah.
And actually, one of the things, as far as you mentioned the judge, I had planned for and I think I mentioned it on the stream. I had planned to do videos for Black History Month, but again, it was the second day of Black History Month, and I actually recorded some stuff, and I just was like, I just didn't care anymore.
Yeah, I can't blame you for that. My head's all over the place lately, right? With everything now, I feel like I'm juggling emotional boulders, with everything, but that's just how it is. That's
why I was on the fence about reaching out to you, because I was like, I knew you had a lot going on, and I know you haven't really talked publicly about I had a rough idea what was where you were. And based on your occasional post, I got we had an idea of your emotional state, and I was like, well, I didn't want to put any pressure on you, because I knew you were going through a lot of stuff and you're being pulled in a lot of directions, and so I said, well, he'll be back when he's ready.
Oh yeah, that's it. I just had to get, as soon as I got. I was in St. Louis for a while, but on both weekends I was busy, so that was it. Well, maybe even only one weekend I was there, whatever. But yeah, I was busy at that time, so I couldn't do it. But the rest of the time I had no internet, you know what I mean? And that seems inconceivable to people these days. But there are situations where you have to survive. I mean, I've got my phone, which can get some things on the sky, but I purposefully don't let my phone be contaminated with anything to do with Facebook. I won't even look at someone else's Facebook on my phone. I don't look at Facebook on my phone. And I mean, they could still, they still have 10,000 data points on me. What the fuck? Who am I fooling? Right. But at the same time, I just think every little bit helps, when it comes to, I find it interesting I don't know.
I don't participate in Facebook just because it's no fun. It's no friggin' fun at all.
It's sort of my internet address for distant people to get a hold of me. That's what it is. I don't really participate in Facebook in the way that most people do. I mean, I don't really look at the homepage hardly ever. And they've recently redesigned Facebook so you can't just go to your own page first. You have to go to the homepage to then go to your own page. And it's like, no, I'm still not looking at your bullshit. Click, click. It's just one extra click. You didn't fool me.
Yeah, I mean, the thing for me is, I'm logged in all the time, so I could actually create a shortcut directly to my own wall, but I don't. I mean, for me, I'm doing it less and less, and I'm trying to not interact. Whenever I interact with people other than friends or in groups that are discussing topics that I'm interested in, I always regret it. Because it's like there's so many dingbats and idiots and contrarians. And actually, out of all of them, contrarians really are the ones I hate the most. Because contrarians will disagree with you, not because they actually disagree, but just to disagree. There are people they disagree. Some people will say to agree to disagree. Some people disagree to disagree. And
I disagree, Joe. I think they're trying to make legitimate points.
Well, my favorite is you can usually trap them though, because when I start to recognize what it is, I'll start to purposely change my position toward their initial position to see if their position stays the same or migrates. And if it migrates, and I've had people where we flip to the point where I'm now arguing their original position and they're arguing mine and my original position. And I'm like, yeah, okay. You just want to argue. You literally just want to argue. You literally just want to say the opposite of what I do because you get off on being disagreeable, And that's something I don't understand. Look. You know me. I mean, if I feel reason the need to argue, if I feel that I strongly disagree with somebody, me. I'm not a wallflower. I'll say it. But I don't ever fucking argue for the sake of fucking argument. That's why
it's not that fun anymore. That's for young people.
Even when I was young,
by the time you get past 40, you don't have time for that bullshit, man.
Even when I was young, I didn't have time for that shit. Because the thing is, again, if you really feel I'm wrong or you're right or whatever, how you want to look at it, fine, stick up for your position and whatever. But people who just literally like to gainsay against whatever somebody else says just for the sake of having a fight, or that's why I told when Amy got very upset about it when I said like I find the whole thing of people, it's one thing to understand the existential arguments and like engage in it maybe once just so you understand, and like what's the limits of our knowledge and all these kind of things. But people who like spend hours and days and stuff just talking about it over and over, I just find that so fucking tedious. Because again, that's arguing for the sake of arguing, and that's to me, no value whatsoever beyond the initial, doing it once to understand it. And
so I tend to spend a lot of time on Facebook. And the reason is because I post a lot of selfies these days more than anything else. That and like inspirational type stuff.
Because she's showing up.
Well, my biggest reason for being on there all the time is I need to know when somewhere in the world a trans person does something of note, because I will then have to answer for it. So over the past like week and a half or so, I have been bombarded with questions about trans athletes, swimmers, and how fair it is and everything else. I mean, if I didn't have Facebook, I don't know how I would, answer all these questions.
Yeah, I find the issue of transports is one of these. I don't know. It's one of these things that the right likes to use. It's just another wedge issue. If you ask me, like so many that they use, they don't actually care about it.
So no, they don't. They don't. And here's the thing: is beyond the fact that most of the people who are talking about it don't give a shit about women's sports. They don't give a shit about any sports for the most part. Beyond all that, the issue it's only an issue because the right wing, the political right in this country has decided that a good way to make it an issue is to completely mislead people about what it is.
Right.
So, like, they don't say it, but what they do is they imply that the cisgendered female athletes in question are white, 12 years old, and blonde. And the trans athlete is a 36-year-old weightlifting black man from Watts.
Mm.
And that now he will be competing in a swimming pool against that little blonde-haired girl. That's the way they paint it. That's the, and I mean, I hadn't really realized that until somebody had posted a picture of Katie Ledecky, who is, a cisgender female swimmer on the team of Leah Thomas, who won the NCAA 500 meter, right? A picture of her was posted on it with an article about Leah Thomas, and people are like, that person should be competing against men. And it's like, but that's not a trans woman. That's a cis woman.
Mm.
I kind of feel like if America was the America that we told ourselves it was back in the 80s or even in the 90s, every time a trans person won a sporting event, it would be celebrated as a great achievement for,
equality.
Moving forward. Yeah. But
Yeah.
it takes, and maybe in some circles it does, but I see so much venom about it. And it just, to me, it's like they're saying, oh yeah, you can go ahead and participate in these sports just as long as you don't win.
And I believe it's because it's presented by for political reasons, it's presented as, this big manly man against this little white blonde-haired little girl.
Yeah.
And that, how is this fair? I mean, it seems like a very obvious question when you paint it that way. Of course, it's not fair.
Well, the thing that gets me too is like Paul was saying. It seems like they only ever bring it up when the trans woman wins, and I'm like, because I even something a friend of mine from college, his wife, who's very liberal, even more liberal than me, somewhere between me and Jack, and she was buying into this bullshit because she posted something, and I was like, and at first I was like, she can't possibly be saying what I think she's saying, but it was very vague. And I asked her to clarify, and she was in fact saying that and how it was terrible and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, there's no evidence that this is a problem when you actually look at the results of trans women competing. And
are you talking about the woman that was commenting on Lisa's?
No, this is somebody else. And yeah, that I ended up blocking that person because that person was just beyond ignorant, because Lisa actually posted something that had statistics showing that Leah before transition and post transition that she lost quite a lot because she's taking your hormones and doing all the things, that her results are not what they used to be. So it's showing that, yes, she's not running as a male, she's running as a female, and this is how it works. But my friend was posting something else, and it got to the point where I was like, look, the evidence does not show trans women dominating the sports they are in. They win about the same rates as anybody else who's competitive at that point. So this is not a real problem. And this person refused to, and I literally had to say, I'm going to have to bow out of this, for friendship. I'm going to have to bow out of this conversation because if it goes any further, it's going to go a bad direction.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, John.
Go ahead. Well, I just saw this recent poll that kind of surprised me, and I think it's partly explaining what's going on. The right-wing focus on trans people for the last like 2 or 3 years has caused polls to shift radically, where people imagine the number of trans people that are in both sports and just in the US population is like so shockingly higher than it actually is. Like there was one poll that came back where this was targeting conservatives. Conservatives believe that 20% of the US population is trans.
No,
Fuck
God.
you,
One
Marcus.
in every 5. Like it's not even 1 in every 5 of 1%. You know, I mean,
So Leah Thomas, right? This swimmer that just won that 500, in this same like event, she placed 5th and she placed 8th in other events. Like she is not, this, man wearing a women's bathing suit who is dominating the sport. Her numbers, her record, post transition and pre transition put her in the same bracket that she was in, before transition, for men, for women. You know what I'm saying? Like if she was like in the 5th overall as a man, well, as a woman, she's in that same category. She's in that same place. So her results have changed, but it left her at the same level.
Right. Right.
So she's still competing as fairly as she was before. So yeah, Marcus, kind of fuck you, because that's not what's happening. Trans women are not setting records, and they're not dominating sports, and they're not taking over. And it isn't all these. Another thing that people say, it's just like, well, if men can't cut it at the sport they want to play, they're just transitioning.
Yeah.
Really, just like that.
I mean, that's the thing. So yeah, actually, Marcus, yes, we wait until there's evidence to show that trans women have this ridiculous advantage that everyone seems to think they do, because so far the evidence suggests the opposite. And here's the thing: testosterone is not a magical elixir to victory.
And neither is a chromosome.
Neither is a chromosome. Oh, and this is Miss Lily, and she's female, and she's awesome. And actually, my dog Molly, and I know I presented Molly several times during the show. I don't know if animals can be trans, but if it's possible, I actually think she was, because she actually exhibited like most of her behaviors are things we associate with male dogs, even to the way she peed. She lifted a leg like a male dog.
Yeah, well, I think many people are familiar with hyenas, how female hyenas will typically take on very masculine traits under various conditions. I think if it exists in the human population, it exists in every other animal population. It's undoubtable.
Yeah, so and we started saying a long time ago. Even we used to call it our little gender confused puppy, because well, that's the thing. When she, for her first heat, and I know female dogs sometimes hump people's legs, but when her first heat, she went to heat before we had a chance to get her fixed. She got on top of Blitzen and was pumping away for all glory, and Blitzen was just like, "What are you doing?" Yeah, but yeah, she literally like on top of her. It was like, whoa. But I definitely think they can exist in the animal population. You're right. Why would humans be any different?
Right. I think that one of the struggles that the conservative evangelicals have is the belief that humans are not part of the animal kingdom in the same way. And so they're really struggling with, even if you present animal kingdom examples of homosexuality or transness or anything else, you're not going to get very far with the conservatives.
I just shared something on Facebook yesterday or the day before, where scientists have taught fish how to drive. I don't know if you guys have seen this whole thing.
This is a few years ago, actually. The aquarium where the fish can direct it by moving to different parts of the aquarium.
And they know it's working because the fish actually drives their aquarium to food. The more they do it, the better they get at it. as far as like their response time and how like much better they're able to maneuver the vehicle, so they understand what what they're doing. They understand that they're in this thing and they have to move it. They get it. And it's fish. And I saw that and I was just like, I for one am ready to welcome our fish overlords.
There you go. Well, see, this is one thing, to what Jack was saying. I made a video about this a long time ago. It was about evolution. Is that right wingers? This is the reason why a lot of right wingers also don't like to accept evolution, because the idea that we come from other animals in the animal kingdom, that not only do they not want to accept that, but they also seem to think it's an indignity somehow. That if we came from proto-simians or proto-apes or the earliest apes or whatever, how you want to categorize it, that somehow that's like a blot on us, because to them animal means wild, crazy, uncontrolled creature. And I'm like, you know what? There's animals that show more empathy than you fuckers.
Right. Well, I mean, as a vegetarian, I constantly run into this, problem trying to describe farm animals as having any kind of, legitimate agency or self-awareness, and whether or not they deserve freedom is a constant contention in this regard.
I'll give people that. Like I don't like when and not to knock anybody's choices. I'm not, but the whole thing about like not eating something that can think or can feel. Yeah, okay, but if they can think and feel, then they know that I can think and feel, and they'd have no problem eating me.
I don't think
I'm not going to presume that I am better than them, so I'll eat them.
Yeah, I don't think the for most vegetarians, and certainly not for me, the consideration is whether or not we kill and eat each other. Everybody in the animal kingdom kills and eats, everything else. It's whether or not we have the right to steal their freedom that bothers me, and I think that's one of the maybe subtleties of the arguments for vegetarian or veganism. Is it's not that we're murdering animals. It's the worst part of that is that we're murdering them after stealing their entire lives.
Here's a question. Let me get this question. So and I'm funny. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was actually wondering the question I'm about to ask you now earlier today, because I was thinking about the whole thing. Now I know you're not going to eat any animals if you can avoid it. But the question: do you have more, or I can say, would you have less of a problem with hunting, since as opposed to?
Yeah, I think I've been open about this on this show before. I have no problem with hunting at all. I don't believe that there's anything significantly different between a hunter taking down a deer and a wolf taking down a deer. That deer has lived the fullest life it is able to within its natural habitat, and you're taking nothing away from it other than its life, and it's no different than any other apex predator.
But there are a lot of vegans out there that are not of that mindset.
And I think
it's like if you're eating something with eyes,
right?
There's a problem. And I've had back and forth with people who are just like, if your sister was comatose, would you eat her? Right. And it's just like it's completely different. It's like how is it different? And it's
I think there's an argument there that maybe it's another sort of subtlety of it, but it isn't that different. I mean, other than most animals don't engage in cannibalism, but there is a degree to which, if you have a variety of choices for your sustenance, why choose the thing where something else has to die for your pleasure? And that's it's a very different thing if you're in a situation where there's a very limited amount of food.
Right.
But if you're in a situation where you have plenty of choice, then I think it does.
I always had a problem with people who had a problem with the fact that other people do decide to not stray from their natural diet, which includes meat. And I remember saying that and being told, "Oh, that's a fallacy, sociological fallacy. It's an argument from nature." And it's just like, maybe, but we are where we are as far as a species with building civilizations and everything else because we evolved to eat different things, and that we eat meat and the things that they had given us as a species, big brain and everything else.
All that stuff works great when you have, natural abundance of rabbits in Australia is a great example. I would never criticize anybody from, killing and eating as many rabbits as they can in Australia.
Right. Because they don't. They're not.
They recently, well, I don't know about how recently, maybe about 10 years ago, I guess it was, they passed a law there that you're allowed, because you weren't allowed to eat iguana. Mm-hmm. Now they're allowing people to, if you want to, catch iguana and eat them, there's no more restriction on that because they had overrun the island. So yeah, but I mean, I can see a moral argument for, against factory farming. I agree with it. It's a good argument. That's not something that we should be doing. That meat that's available should be what would be the word?
As humanely produced.
As humanely and ethically as possible. Factory farms are disgusting. And I mean, you're not even getting good food from it anyway. The food that you're getting is shit anyway, because, the animals are eating their own shit. You are what you eat. So if you're eating a lot of pig from a pig factory farm, you're pig shit. So, I mean, garbage in, garbage out, right? So, but that doesn't mean that all meat is unethical and it's not immoral to eat meat. It's natural to eat meat. That's what you're supposed to eat.
It's, I mean, the complicating factor in that is how much, how much extinction the human species has caused on other species. I mean, we're not existing in a particularly well-balanced scenario.
Right. So, but I mean, and the problem, the complication there is how much pain and misery and environmental damage has veganism and vegetarian diets caused. How many people are priced out of eating the native foods because they can't eat it because of vegan diets must have their superfood. I mean, we see no matter what, as humans, no matter what we decide.
Now, here's the thing. Now, I generally don't get into the argument about it most because, again, I have no stake in what other people eat. So no pun intended. So the thing is that I never argue for meat. I mean, unless it's put to me, but I'll make similar things. See, that's the thing, and I think Jack, obviously he makes very good intellectual arguments as to why it's better to eat a vegetarian or vegan diet than not, and I think that's fine. I think I guess I wish more vegetarians. Well, I should say I wish more vegetarians and vegans who were vocal were like Jack, because I think there's a lot of people who are perfectly fine and decent vegetarians and vegans that just don't really talk about it very much for one reason or another. But unfortunately, the vocal people, it's the kind of thing with everything. The vocal people tend to be assholes, and again, for that matter, I chastised meat eaters. I chastised meat eaters today because, there, Hello Fresh. This is like a local. I don't know if they're nationwide, but they're food.
Yeah, they are nationwide.
And so they made a little joke about for the people who are on meat-based diets because they're advertising meat, and so a whole bunch of vegans have to get their nose out of joint and complain and how terrible it is and blah 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 and how morally superior they are and we're all crap. And I'm like, yeah, dude, everything you're saying, because the thing is, none of them really they're making you, of course, the emotional appeal, right? And they're basically being arrogant about it. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? You were never going to get anybody with that approach,
right?
But conversely, so then there was a vegan. It was an advertising for vegan eggs. So obviously calling it eggs is silly because they're not really eggs, but I get it. Egg substitute. It's an alternative to eggs. Fair enough. Okay. So and the idea is that it's an egg replacement. So they're calling it eggs because if you needed to use eggs, use these instead. I get it. And then I looked into the thread, and there were a bunch of meat eaters being assholes, and I was like, fellow meat eaters, leave the vegans alone. You know, like
I never understood that
we
either.
don't like it when they're sanctimonious and come and say nasty shit to us. It doesn't look any better when you do it. So just knock it off and leave them the fuck alone.
Right. But I mean, you know, there's almost 8 billion, or there are 8 billion of us now, right? 8 billion of us now. There's plenty of land, you know, to farm and to grow food and blah, 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 blah. It is there. And we're just managing what we have very, 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 very badly. One of the biggest issues in world hunger isn't about not having food. It's about the logistics,
distribution,
and mostly greed. It's mostly no one wants to distribute it to where it needs to go because there's not enough in it for them.
Right. These are problems with capitalism, not with the actual food source.
Right. So, I mean, on a lot of the arguments that are made by vegans, there's the moral argument, there's the hunger issue, and there is an issue with hunger. Food waste is another one, which never made sense to me because most of the food waste on this planet is actually plants. It's vegetables. You know, it's crops. There's the amount of crops that are wasted is just
because it's one of the more difficult things to transport and maintain freshness.
Vegan diets, price local farmers out of their own crops that they can't even afford to eat what they're growing.
Right.
These things have happened. And so my point is, it doesn't matter what we eat until we learn how to manage our land better. Yeah. Whether you're a vegan or an omnivore or whatever it is, it's going to have an impact that is unfavorable on our environment.
I think this is the reason that these little fights between vegans and meat eaters even exist, is because these are, fandoms that are caused by capitalism and by sort of, the tribalism of
bacon.
Brand.
It's the tribe of bacon.
Well,
the bacon tribe.
Just the brand affiliation that we've kind of turned into our main way of operating in the world causes some of this, because most people, when it comes down to it, will agree that you want to be able to eat what tastes good without doing very much harm. You want to feel good about the animals and their circumstances, even though the most sort of performative meat eater doesn't really want to see cows and pigs suffer.
Right.
They're not in it for that.
Which is why, sorry to interrupt you, Jack, but there's the reason why I never understood why, I think it's Beyond Meat or one of them, that one of their selling points was that it bleeds just like real meat. And I'm like, that's the least appetizing part of meat that exists. I mean, if anything would have turned me off from eating meat, it would be this. And again, it's not even really blood, it's like protein, but it looks blood-like.
Right.
I've known people that actually like that. When they want it to bleed when they cut into it. There are people that think they're T-Rexes.
Yeah. No, I listened to a talk given by, I think it was the two co-creators or co-founders for Beyond, and they were talking about that, where their marketing research and everything discovered that there were enough people who really found the concept of it bleeding appealing that they began folding it into their. In fact, it was almost a requirement within a certain subsection of the population.
That's so weird to me. To me, taste and texture are the things that matter the most as far as meat goes, and that's why the whole thing of the laboratory meat. I'm like, well, if the taste and texture is, I think texture is going to be a tough road to hoe, because meat has the texture it does because the animal does a certain amount of movement and work.
Right.
Texture, meat that's grown probably won't.
It's a tough road to hoe.
Unless they come up with a way to stress it so that it develops grain structure.
That's actually how it is made. So, and it's using electrical impulses to essentially force the cells into into muscle structures or something.
Mm.
I'm not clear on all the details, and there's obviously been a lot of evolution in a very short amount of time with
Right.
how it's done. But early experiments in lab-grown meat were subjecting the cell tissue to these like repeated electrical impulses that organize them into particular muscle texture.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. Yeah. Well, let's see. I'll give it a try then once it becomes available, and if I like it, I go that way. Now, but again, that's the thing. Again, I much rather talk about this subject with someone like you, Jack, who's got reasoned intellectual arguments. You're not going at it with emotion. And because again, like Ray was saying, the people that are like, if you ever touch a speck of meat, you're the evil person. I'm like, yeah, really? Because like you said, availability. Like I would argue with them, like, well, what about the people who live in high mountains that live up where the plants don't even grow, or if it does, it's like bracken. Well, they eat goats and they drink goat's milk because literally you can't grow anything on the land at all. It's it's a mountain, and so they depend on goats for pack animals.
Many of those people suffer from two of the things that, regardless of where you are on any ideological spectrum, you're going to find the people who wish for a more simple black and white argument and a simpler world, and people who really are younger. To put it bluntly, they're not super sophisticated in how they've adopted the world.
Yeah, because the thing is, I would actually, personally, like I would actually like to eat less meat than I do. I have a problem. There's most vegetables I don't like, and I have a problem now being diabetic. Grains are really bad for me, and starches are really bad for me, and and that means most fruits are not really good for me either. So
I'm actually right now I'm trying to increase the amount of meat that I eat, and also increase the amount of green vegetables I eat while cutting out as much starch as I can.
See, the funny thing for me is that, like, because when it comes to environmental damage on the meat side, so one of the things that comes up a lot is conversion rates, which I understand the idea that, hey, it takes 7 pounds of vegetable matter to get 1 pound of meat. So the idea is, well, hey, we could feed more people if we just ate the vegetable matter, which isn't always true. Sometimes it is true, and sometimes it's not. It's like, grain-fed beef. Yeah, that's true because we could eat the grain. Although a lot of the grain they eat is dent corn and not sweet corn, and dent corn is not really very well digestible by humans, so it's not. And then when you look at like goats and pigs, I mean, like I think pigs on paper it's 3.4 is the conversion rate, but pigs don't eat feed. Pigs eat scrap, so they're not displacing any food. In fact, if anything, they're taking food waste and turning it into energy. Which is why, as much as, because pigs are very intelligent, probably of the things we eat, they're one of the more intelligent things that we eat.
They're also incredibly biologically similar to humans, so much so that we can exchange organs with pigs.
Right. So
and they're delicious.
That's right. So for those two reasons, makes me would like on the one level want to like eat less of it, but then when you look at the conversion factor, the fact that they're actually probably doing the least amount of ecological damage, and they're certainly displacing no food, food that vegetable matter that humans could use for food. I'm like, well, shit,
The problem with pigs is when they get out, is when they get loose. Like there were no pigs at all on this continent until they were brought over by Europe.
Right,
Europeans. So, and when some got out, now there's a population of wild boar in the United States.
It's very tasty, by the way.
Yes, right, still tasty. But they destroy a lot of farms, a lot of crops. And they're a problem. They've become a nuisance animal.
Okay, so then maybe that's what I should do. I should limit my consumption to wild boar because I'm actually getting rid of an invasive species that's harming things.
There you go. Problem solved.
Hello, Michael.
Delicious.
I'm like,
did I miss dinner?
So tonight for dinner, I actually made and it came out really good. I made a authentic Peruvian lomo saltado. Fantastic. I've
Nice.
made it before, but this is the first time I actually followed an actual Peruvian recipe, and I really wanted to make sure it was really good.
Awesome.
And yeah, I was so happy with it.
Suzanne made very good Italian wedding soup and bread. She had homemade
I
bread.
love Italian wedding soup.
Raven, what makes the recipe you made authentic and not cultural appropriation?
All food is cultural appropriation.
That's true.
No, I would argue that it's not. There's a difference between sharing and there's a, and you guys all know this, that there's a difference between sharing, cultural sharing and cultural appropriation.
But
if you're making it at home and you're eating it,
But you're not Peruvian. You called it authentic.
Oh, because it's a recipe that
I just think that the whole nonsense about that, to me it's nonsense, and I'm sorry if I patronize anybody by saying that, but to me it's nonsense, because back in the 90s I remember it was cool for me to be wearing clothes from Guatemala or fucking to wear like a Muslim hat or whatever, and
You thought it was cool
from those cultures appreciated the fact that I was emulating their culture.
Okay,
I will say, as somebody who worked in various Indian restaurants, and because the part of Berkeley I grew up was Little Bombay, so I worked in a sari shop. The people selling saris were very happy to sell saris to white people who came through the shop. They were very excited to have the business.
Okay,
same with the restaurants.
I will give you an example, Paul, that I think will be incontrovertible. When clubs that were whites only had black performers playing black music at clubs that black people weren't allowed to go, that is appropriation writ large.
Well, I don't even call that culture appropriation. I call that segregation.
Yeah.
But basically the idea is, okay, we're going to take this thing of black culture and we're going to enjoy it, but we're going to deny the people who create it because we think these people are inferior and
I take the point. I see the dynamic at play there, but I don't really. I see that more as just pure oppression.
Yeah. Right, but that's the whole point. Cultural appropriation is oppression.
Right.
I suppose so.
But it's been sort of it's a concept that has migrated out of academia and then become it's morphed into something that is not very. It doesn't resemble
hairstyles and clothing now. It's about hairstyles and clothing now, Joe.
Joe, that was very blatant, and I'm sorry for the people who had to experience that. We should keep our racism like down on the down low and just raise the ticket prices to $200. That'll solve the problem, right?
What?
If the ticket prices are $200 a pop,
I don't know what
to keep out certain demographics of people who can't afford them.
Okay. Well, yes, and that would, yeah. Well, that's the thing. There are ways. You're bringing up the ways that people are marginalized without saying it directly.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we will find ways. So we find black people tend to be marijuana smokers more than white people. Okay, let's make marijuana illegal and make the penalties. And black people prefer crack over powder. And we'll make the penalties on that much higher. Yeah, exactly. I don't. Yeah. It's the backdoor bigotry. It's like, well, it's just a law. We didn't make it against, it's not, it doesn't say black people, even though it affects black people way more, and we know that.
Yeah. And obviously we're seeing similar things in the response to Ketanji Brown Jackson's just the way people are talking about her and demanding to see LSAT scores and, the
LSAT, that was, there were so many ridiculous things, right? But that one stands out because it's like, that's what you need to get into law school. So even if her scores, and actually here's the funny part, just say for sake of argument, her LSAT scores weren't that great. So if they want to say it was, affirmative action that got her into college and she didn't necessarily have the numbers to get there, but she got there, but she graduated, so she passed. So even if they made the entry requirements lower to get her to get in there, once she got there, she still had to pass the same requirements as anybody else. So that actually would demonstrate the inherent problems in the system already that keep out people that turn out to actually be qualified, and that there's bias in the system that they're totally ignoring.
Of course, they're not interested in any of those details.
Who here has taken the LSAT?
Say again?
Who here has taken the LSAT?
I have not.
No.
I have. Guess what's not on the LSAT?
Law.
Anything that has to do with legal matters. It's all
Right.
logic problems and math.
Right, because it's before you actually get there. That's the thing.
Yeah, there's no wording in the LSAT that has anything to do with actual legal issues.
And it's beyond the fact that it's unfortunate that my mom died, just because it's sad that my mom died. But on top of it, the video I was in the process of recording was actually about the first Black men and women to get law degrees and to become judges in America. And actually, it turns out the first Black man to get a law degree also became the first Black judge. And there were two, and I had called out two women. That one was the first lawyer, and then one was the first judge. And all the crap that they had to go through to get there. And then of course you get Thurgood Marshall being the first Black person on the Supreme Court. But we still not had a Black woman, and it was still in our long history. I think it was 141 years from the first time we had a Black lawyer. We've had two Black people on the Supreme Court.
So let's talk about a Black person that's on the Supreme Court. Let's talk about Clarence Thomas. Let's talk about how he should probably be charged with sedition.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know how directly he is related to his wife's position, even though they are married. That I know that legally you can't.
Right, legally, right. But I mean, there are ways to have at least an understanding of their relationship, because they actually have made that clear.
Right.
She has referred to him in text messages about legal issues with Donald Trump as her best friend, and publicly she has said that they're best friends. So Zinnia Jones, for you guys who remember, ZJ, she did this whole thing on this thread on Twitter that was fantastic, where she talked about her and her wife Heather. They're best friends. She's like, we're best friends. Peach and I talked about this. That's why during the interview with you last night, Paul, she said that, I'm her only friend, because we were talking about the fact that we were best friends. And best friend spouses, that's some heavy duty shit. There are people that are married and they're together for 50 years, 60 years, sometimes all their lives, but they don't talk a whole lot. They don't share a whole lot. They kind of go through life together, but they're still very separate, and they don't necessarily tell each other everything. My parents were like that. I think a lot of people's parents were like that. But like Heather and ZJ and Peach and I, we share everything. Everything. Like, she's my other half, but she's my best friend. She knows everything, like everything. And I have a feeling with the Thomases, they have a similar dynamic, because she has multiple times referred to him as her best friend. He knew everything from the beginning, and he voted. I mean, it influenced his voting, because we can see it. 8 justices voted in order to allow Trump's documents to be released. He voted no. He was the only no vote.
Do you know? Did you see or know anything? I mean, normally when there's a dissenting opinion, they write it. They write why they dissented. Did you see anything about what he said?
I didn't. I didn't.
No.
I don't know. And maybe that's something I should look up. But I mean, it does say a lot that he was the only no, and because he was the minority opinion. What we found out from that decision was that his wife was involved. So his no was to protect her.
Right.
There's certainly strong reason to believe that. I mean, you know, I guess you'd call it circumstantial reasons, but because I mean, like,
I call it sedition.
Yeah.
well, I mean, basically, you know, it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, right? But yeah,
Yeah, I'm only saying that like all this stuff is so like baldly obvious, and yet there is probably just enough sort of like legal distance that it doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter anyway because he's a conservative and he's not going to be he's not going to be nobody's going to do anything. That's just not the way it works.
yeah, right. In a functional democracy, he'd be getting impeached right now, right? That we have impeached a Supreme Court justice at least once. I'm pretty sure, possibly twice. I can't remember, but so it's not like it's never happened. But over this, I just, you know, the politics are so toxic, especially in Congress and especially in the Senate, and that's where impeachment has to ultimately
Yeah.
happen.
I was just thinking about the fact that Mitch McConnell just starved the children of, you know, every poor Kentuckian, white or black, and he will absolutely certainly be reelected next time. Is if he's still alive, you know, that's just the nature of it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to pull another Charlie Chaplin line. As long as men die, liberty will never perish.
Hmm.
You look confused, Jack. The idea is that dictators can never last forever. They will eventually die.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's very likely that, you know, once Mitch McConnell is finally gone, there isn't anyone in his specific place to take over for him. But yeah, there's going to be another Mitch McConnell type to slot into that as long as we're on this course.
All we can do is fight them when they come. That's why someone who will remain nameless, who was so, you know, in the sense like, oh, we have to find out what crazy people in the right wing are doing, because they might make DeSantis the next candidate. And like, well, if they do, we'll bomb that bridge when we come to it. You know, I mean, as if one.
And then we'll all sit down and watch Batman.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's the thing. It's not. First of all, it's not as if, you know, DeSantis is like, you know, an unbeatable force. You know, he doesn't have the cult around him that way Trump did. No one did.
Right.
I mean, Trump was, you know, certainly for worse, this really weird force. But at the end of the day, you deal with what comes, and you have to, you know, if it's bad, you fight it. If it's not great, you try to make it better, and just, you know.
I'm just glad that Donald Trump is losing steam. He's, you know, the noise around him, the number of people that kept him afloat is reducing.
Yes.
So hopefully it's fast enough to keep him from running again. But
What do you think is up with the New York thing where they're sort of stalling on that? I mean, me and Peach talked about that a little bit last night. Why aren't they indicting Donald Trump? I mean, what do you think? I mean, is it just payola or what?
I think it's possibly that, or it's somebody who supports him.
Well, it's weird though, because the person, I thought the DA is a Democrat. The only thing I could think of is if he really felt like, because he, you know, as much as his mojo is waning, that it's impossible to get a conviction. So, but the thing is, to me, and I get the idea that, hey, if we try to convict him and he gets found not guilty, then does that strengthen his position? Does that, you know? So I get that.
I have a hard time believing that they can't get a jury to convict him.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I'm just thinking about the.
It's not Mississippi. It's New York.
Yeah.
New Yorkers don't like him.
Well, and the thing is that, I mean, you know, and while both sides have preemptory challenges, there are, it's New York. There's ways to stack a jury, just like they'd stack a jury in Mississippi, right? When a black person's on trial and there's like no black people on there, and it's like, you know. So yeah, I think they're making a mistake, but I think that may be part of the calculation.
Well, I think the reluctance is it also makes me personally more suspicious about Merrick Garland and the January 6th prosecutions and why we're not getting more steam on that. You know what I mean? I mean, time is running out. They're deliberately running the clock out on the other side as much as they can. I mean, Mark Meadows, how many weeks has it been since Mark Meadows was under review for whether or not they're going to arrest him for fucking contempt of Congress? It's ridiculous. Why haven't and nothing's happened to Mark Meadows at all? And so there's no consequences for the bad guys at the top, but just the foot soldiers apparently. And I'm.
And even the foot
To me,
soldiers
the biggest problem about this is twofold. Number one, we're not going to get the bad guys, and we really need to set a precedent for history. And number two, it's just another reason that saps the Democratic voting tendency. Who's just like, well, fuck, they're not even going to arrest these motherfuckers for all this shit. Or really, why should I vote for these people if they're not going to do what they're there to do? You know, I can hear people saying that all the time, and I'm just like, well, I hear you. You know, I don't know what to tell you. Democrats in Congress aren't as assertive as maybe they ought to be. You know,
it's so funny that a 20-year-old almost Simpson joke is constantly relevant. Of the Republican convention, we're evil, and the Democratic convention, we're pathetic and we don't know how to lead. It's like it doesn't matter. It doesn't change.
Well, I don't know. I mean, governing is never easy, right? And there's people, on the Republican side, but in particular, but not only, but in particular, who are determined not to make government work or not to allow government to work. They want to wreck it on purpose so that they can replace it with something else. I honestly think that's the program.
Yeah. I mean, I think that they've always believed in having a small elite rule everything, and democracy was always an antithetical position for anybody on the, extreme conservative side. And now all of the Republican Party is the extreme conservative side. So you're never going to see them be pro-democracy or average person really for the rest of the time that the Republican Party will exist, which may not be that much longer, honestly. And I don't have particularly better things to say about the Democrats.
I mean, the right has been like, it's not like there's like this one concerted kind of effort. It's kind of like this hodgepodge of different ideologies, different, you're talking like the QAnon and the conspiracy people. You're talking about dominionists and the hardcore religious right, white nationalists. I mean, it's like this strange bedfellows kind of a thing.
But they do have that thing in common that I talked about at the beginning of this stream. Is it's all hierarchy maintenance.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's the thing, and they're all pro autocracy and to some degree.
Right. So I mean, they have like this common goal. And it kind of makes for, like I said, strange bedfellows. This hodgepodge of ideas. But you know what? The left is heading down a similar road, where we've got all of these different, very strange groups. Some of them. You talk about some of the tankies that are like just nuts. They're cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
It's like that. I think there's a Stone Toss cartoon, and it's one of those things that Stone Toss is clearly, a very right-wing cartoonist, but this one joke gets reappropriated because it works so well. Is there's the people on the tug of war, and they're pulling, and how the heck does the OAN people and the far left sort of like tanky people end up pulling on the same side of the rope? But it does happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like it's been said for a long time. The idea that the horseshoe, right? That the at the extremes, the methods, if not the goals of either extreme, tend to be very similar.
Yeah.
And this is what worries me about what Paul is saying, and I get where you're coming from, Paul, but way I've always been, again, maybe it's from being black in America, right? I mean, basically, for us, it's always defensive. It's always harm reduction. We're never expecting brilliant things to happen. We're always saying, how do we, what's going to fuck us up the least?
Right.
So basically, like, I don't have the luxury of saying, oh, it doesn't matter, and doing nothing, because when that happens, that means the right wing is going to win, and I'm indirectly in the line of fire. And so I tried to tell a guy I know back last summer. I was down in Texas, and he was trying to understand why black people stopped voting Republican, because up until the early till 1960 or so, black people were a very consistent Republican voter, because of course the Republicans were more of the
Party of Lincoln.
Right, Party of Lincoln, and they were actually a more progressive party. And he didn't understand. He's like, well, the Democrats, that was the KKK, and I'm like, yeah, but who does the KKK support now? David Duke likes Republicans, and and so it's
Tommy, if you just want to give somebody $100, my PayPal is deadpool@hotmail.com. Thank you.
I was trying to understand, and I was just trying to explain this to him. I'm like, well, it's not that we think the Democrats are saviors. Is that we know that the Democrats pay us a lot of lip service, but they don't generally actively harm us. But the guys you vote for do, and that's really what it comes down to. And so, I would like the Democrats to be more effective than they are, to be more progressive than they are. I'll probably never be as progressive as Jack, but certainly I'm more progressive than the Democratic Party has been collectively. But at the end of the day, they're the only game in town if I don't want autocracy, at least at the moment. And and if that changes, I'll deal with it. But I have to stop the autocrats, because the autocrats are going to have me killed, literally. And they'll have Raven killed, literally.
Yeah, and I don't see the Democrats moving left. The concern and consideration of the mainstream media is that the Democrats will be influenced by the left in some monstrous way to become communists or something. And if anything, the longer this goes on, the more right wing the Democrats become.
And meanwhile, all the communists are out there saying, what?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the media that I've been watching, I mean, there is some of that, Jack. There's also, though, this feeling that the Democrats aren't left enough. That is,
I mean,
it's kind of like, we want you to come one step. It was just one step. Just take and the Democrats won't.
No, of course not, and particularly not Joe Biden. I mean, his State of the Union address was deeply disappointing, but also completely unsurprising. When his response to Black Lives Matter and the murders by police is to double down on extra funding and everything else. If there was any, I hate to just come out and say Bionic Dance was right. There is no pushing Biden to the left.
Meanwhile, in Denver, we've been adding social workers and counselors to our police force, and sending out counselors rather than police officers.
That's great.
And they've so far responded to like thousands and thousands of calls where policemen didn't have to be called. And strangely, for thousands of calls, they've never once asked for police backup yet. I'm waiting for that like one time that it happened. It still hasn't.
Well, here's the question now: are those counselors, is that money coming from the police budget?
No.
That's where I was going to go.
No. They added money to the police budget for it.
Oh, right. But I mean, but it's part of the police budget then.
Yeah, it's still part of the police
added
budget.
to the budget. It's so that's what I was going to say. Like when Jack talked about, doubling down on the budget for the
Yeah.
police, that doesn't necessarily mean more cops or more weapons. It may actually, it really depends on who is getting the money and
Who's spending the money? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that becomes a more localized thing.
Yeah, I mean, and if every circumstance operates that way, then I'm still not going to be in favor of adding funding to the police. I think
I get it.
I
funding
think optically, just the
separately.
statement doesn't sound great. You know what I mean? In the
Yeah.
context of everything we just lived through.
But
Yeah.
the problem is elections. That's the problem. The problem is we don't live in a society where a president is in power for 4 years and then runs for election, or one of their, party mates runs for election, and the next person's in power for 4 years and then runs for election. They're
I know, but this
constantly-
just sounds like
constantly.
the
But okay, wait a second, Jack.
yeah.
This is the way elections work, though. And because it's a constant election cycle, it never stops. Okay, so Joe Biden might be thinking, and everything he's being told is, okay, we have these problems, and it's because police are getting funding and they're buying tanks instead of social workers and blah, 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 blah. What do? We give them more money, because if we don't, the other side, the very next day, will say that party wants to see you killed by gang members in your sleep while your daughter is raped in the next
It
room.
doesn't matter. They always will anyway. I mean, again, we're seeing it with Ketanji Brown Jackson.
I agree. I mean, that's a little bit different, though.
I mean, they're attacking her. Well, they're attacking the decision she made in a few cases that regard child porn or something like that, and they are like right in line, consistent with basically any other judge who's ever been on the bench. And it doesn't matter like what she has done. It doesn't matter what her record is. That's going to be attacked because she's on the wrong side. It does not matter how much you bend over backwards or kowtow or change your policy in order to be less attackable by the right.
Well, I mean, Barack Obama
is going to be attacked.
Barack Obama proved that with the healthcare bill, though. When he bent over backwards, the Republicans, everything they wanted, everything they asked for, they got, and then they didn't vote for it.
Right. Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing that's being missed, I think. You are correct that no matter what the Democrats do, the right's going to attack it. 100%. And for that matter, we're thinking everything the right thing is, the Democrats are going to attack. I mean, it's politics. The difference is whether or not the blow lands. And so here's the thing. If I had no problem, everyone here in this forum understands what Black Lives Matter actually means. We all know what defund the police actually means. I know you know, and I know everybody here knows. But unfortunately, it was not working. It was not playing well to the electorate. Now, that sucks, but it wasn't. So if the public was believing, whether or not they should have is another matter, but this meant that the Democrats were basically going to allow crime to run rampant, and the fact that crime has been up on the rise, it scares people. So the difference is to say, okay, I'm going to double down. Now, again, I don't know what strings that money will come with. I hope they'll come with some good strings, but the idea is that
it won't.
Yeah, well, you don't know that, Jack. I mean, you can be cynical all you want, and don't fucking interrupt me about that. It really fucking pisses me off when you want to throw cynical comments out when I'm trying to explain something. It really pisses me off. So anyway, but the thing of the matter is, what remains to be seen. It might or might not. We don't know. You could be totally right. You could be wrong. I could be right. I could be wrong. And in fact, actually, I'm saying I don't know whether it'll be strings attached or not. But the fact of the matter is, defunding the police is a loser at the election at the gate, and so this is what it comes down to. So we can bemoan the fact that it's a loser. I bemoan it because again, I think it was a perfectly acceptable slogan and was understandable by anybody who wanted to understand it. But this is what you have to deal with. This is how politics works. It's dirty and it's messy, and you have to win. And this is actually the problem that the left has all the time, is that you have to win in order to govern. And if we can, that's why I've said to you before, like I understand that you feel that we should try to rehabilitate what socialism is, because you're right. Most people, even people who call themselves socialists, a lot of them don't even know what it really is. You know what it is. We know what it is, but most people don't. I think it's a loser because it's unfortunately been made toxic. It shouldn't have never been allowed to be made toxic, but it was. I would much rather have the socialist parts, at least the parts that I agree with, and have those things in our society and make society better than fight over whether people understand the definition, because they're not gonna. And it's a loser. It loses at the polls, and that's what fucking matters.
Yeah, and I completely agree that it loses at the polls. It doesn't mean that it is the wrong approach. But if I'm cynical, it's because I have basically all of history to back me up. I don't think that there's any chance at all that there will be strings attached. We live in a country where if it is a right-wing talking point, it will get traction. And there's no way to defend against that. You can't ever change your policy enough. You can't ever, be right-wing enough in your policy to appease that side. And I just don't think it's worth it.
Affordable Care Act.
Yeah,
The Affordable Care Act is evidence of that.
I don't think it's worth.
I wanted to address Tommy if I can.
Oh yeah,
Sure.
Go ahead.
So, Tommy, I don't disagree with you that 3 months for a child porn deviant. I don't disagree with you that person probably should have gotten the 97 months that was asked for. But her sentencing, her decisions are in line with pretty much all the other judges. So she's not doing something that's like some kind of like, it's not like some kind of deviation from the norm. She's doing what judges do. Like it, don't like it, whatever, that becomes irrelevant because she isn't a special case. They're all doing that.
And more often than not, prosecutors want to recommend stiff penalties anyway. I mean, that's part of what they're.
It's part of that's their job, right?
Yeah, I mean, Tommy from the Bronx should look into what Bill Barr did to support Epstein. And how come Epstein continued to do what he did long after Bill Barr specifically let him off the hook when there was a chance to nail him to the wall in the first place? So the right wing doesn't give a shit about child victims of like the pornography industry or trafficking or anything else. It's all completely, made up to pretend to be outraged about when it is theoretically somebody who's a Democrat or so outside of their tribe.
Okay, I want to agree with Jack real quick because I totally agree with you 100%. And another example of that is how many cases have we seen just in the last 3-4 years where a child, someone under 10, prepubescent, was raped, and some judge said, "Oh well, the rapist was a good Christian,
right?
So that they'll let them off with a light sentence." And in the one case, that one fucking piece of shit judge who actually said that somehow the 5-year-old that was raped was somehow at least partly responsible for being raped. And how he wasn't stoned to death.
So Tommy, well, you're correct that it's horrific and that it's terrible and that person deserves to possibly be curb stomped, although I'm not advocating it, but why not? While we're with you. But the issue is it isn't that judge. It's all of them. Because what she did, her decisions are within the norm of sentencing. And like it or not, that's what it is. And her alone should not be held responsible for what our entire justice system is doing when it comes to this particular issue.
Yeah, the fact that the sentencing guidelines for rape are lighter than the sentencing guidelines for a lot of drug crimes says everything you need to know about how fucked up our system is. And I'm going to start using what people are doing. They're not calling it the criminal justice system anymore, calling it the criminal legal
penal system.
Yeah, because that's what it is. It's not about it's not justice.
Yeah. Hey, I'd like to go and Sarah, because there's something back when we were talking about the war that I wanted to touch on, but it's not necessarily about the war directly, but it's connected to that. So like I've seen on media sources, they're telling me that in Russia they're using Fox News, as to sort of demonstrate to their people, a version of the truth in quotation marks that they want them to be comfortable with, that this is what they're saying in America, kind of a thing, right? And in particular Tucker Carlson. Now, I don't know, man. How far have these Republicans gone? I mean, once upon a time, the Republican Party was, I thought, the more sort of anti-communist party, and also therefore anti-sort of authoritarian. And this shift has gone so far now that they're and what's with Rupert Murdoch as well, right? I mean,
So I
running
mean,
that empire and doing that.
but I mean, number one, Russia isn't communist. That's number one.
No,
Number
right?
two,
Yeah, I know that, but
number
yeah.
two. Well, right. So number two, though, and probably some on the left, I don't know, but most definitely there are right-wing Republicans who would like to be American oligarchs in a Russian-style system, which is one of the reasons why I break you talk about they're destroying the system on purpose. Yes, so they can become oligarchs. That's what they want. And they want to declare themselves to be in charge of whatever little segment of the country that they want to be in charge of. They want to declare themselves that, and they want to hang on to it. So Russia is a pretty good template for them to use. So there's that. And also Fucker Tarleson, he just recently said that he is pro-Russia. He said he's on Putin's side on this. He said
this is one of those things about, Joe was talking about what lands and what doesn't. This is one of those things, if it was a Democrat who said it, or somebody from MSNBC or something, we would hear 2 or 3 weeks of constant, this person is a traitor, look at them, this is treason against America. The Democrats are never going to do that to Tucker Carlson. Nobody on it, and even if they did, it's never going to stick. There's just something different in the character of what sticks to anybody, left of Tucker Carlson. Really,
Fucker Tarleson was actually just I think today or yesterday was suspended from Twitter. So there you go.
Tiny victories, but yeah,
You take them where you get them.
There's just a difference, I think, in the way America responds to sort of manufactured controversy as it relates to somebody perceived as a Democrat versus anybody on the right.
If I can back to where we were with Tommy,
Sure. Sorry.
I link for us that we should put out in the chat from the New York Times, and I'm just going to say none of us are very close to this case. We don't really know the facts. We know what's being reported to us, but from what I see in this New York Times article about this case, about that particular child pornography case, this was a guy who was sexually repressed because he had a overbearing religious family, and he was gay, and he actually wasn't viewing this stuff, which was kids within 6 years of his age, as sexualized material, as much as he was just trying to find identity. And this was what was brought out in a psychological evaluation of the man, which was presented to the judge. And I'm going to side with, being a mental health professional myself, I'm going to side with this psychologist who actually talked to the guy about what was going on, because she did too. The Ketanji Brown Jackson, she sided with the psychologist because she went under the federal guidelines, the amount of time that they're not binding, but she went under that. She went under what the prosecutors were asking for. And it's because she had a different understanding of all the different facts of the story. It wasn't black and white. And when you have a problem of religious overbearing parents not allowing their children who happen to be expressing in different ways to live, you're going to have problems such as this. Like they're having a hard time finding anyone to identify with in their little small town where they're oppressed. And that's what happened.
That's what happened. So I wanted to really quickly say to Tommy that Twitter is not free speech. It isn't. You don't have a free speech right to use Twitter to tweet. You don't. I'm sorry, Tommy. This is something that comes up every now and then. It's not. Sorry, nobody's rights are being denied. And Tucker Carlson has the largest platform on the planet. His voice isn't being silenced. His free speech isn't being denied. He has more speech than anybody in the world. In the world, Tommy.
Last thing I'll say about people who end up on a sex offender registry list is that their sentence gets extended by companies that scrub the sex offender registry lists and then resell the information to like private servers who then extort those people forever for life. So whatever they're sentenced to be on the list for however many years, it gets extended forever, which is not part of their sentence. They're not sentenced to be on the sex offender registry list forever for those crimes, but it gets extended anyway. We have a problem with that.
Yeah, the other thing too is that, and I could be wrong, but as near as I can tell, if you're on the registry, you're on the registry. So whether it's I mean, I'm not going to say any of the crimes are not crimes or not bad, but there are degrees. Some things are worse than others.
Yes.
So I wanted to go ahead, Joe. Go.
So unless the registry actually differentiates,
the registry does in my state, and it says what kind of crime happened, and some of the people who were just urinating in public in view of children because they were homeless, it says exactly that. But who's looking that far?
Right. So, okay. So I never thought those lists were a very good idea because how do you differentiate between different things? Number one. And number two, there are people that end up being put on that list because of bigotry. I mean, so if you are 18 years old and you've got your 17 or 18-year-old girlfriend and you are parked under a tree late at night by the ball field and the lights are out and you're making out and a cop comes, he might just keep going because, you're a good American young couple, and you're making out and who knows, you go, kids. But if it's a gay couple, they're getting arrested.
Right.
And you're going on a registry. Period.
Tommy, I see the numbers that you have in your comment, and I would compare those numbers to what's in the news article. Again, I don't have any of the real facts. All I have is what's been being reported. Your numbers in your comment don't match what's in the news article, except that there was one of the people in those images that was under the age of 13. That part is true, but 6,000 photos is a stretch compared to what's in that news article.
Well, that's part of the problem, right? Too, because not that it never happens on the left, but the right is very comfortable just making numbers up and just throwing them out there, and then, as Jack says, they kind of metastasize and become the talking points, even if they're completely unfounded. And that's a serious problem. I mean, if one thing is, I mean, you said about the employers. Now, obviously, being an employer, this is something that I wrestle with all the time. Is that, because some states now want to basically have it that you can't even ask the question.
Yeah.
And I find myself on the fence about it because I can totally see that. I think people shouldn't be punished beyond what their prescribed punishment says it should be. But then I'm also like, well, also to make sure that I don't subject my fellow other employees to someone who could be dangerous. I'm like, ugh. So I don't know. I don't know the answer, but I do recognize it as a problem.
In my state, you're allowed to ask if somebody's a felon, but you're not allowed to ask about misdemeanor offenses. And I know every state is different on those laws. Even apartments, when you apply to live somewhere, they're allowed to ask if you're a felon in my state. That's even worse for my clients, is that they can't find a good cheap place to live.
A friend of mine, actually somebody, I'm pretty sure I know Paul knows her. A friend of mine who moved up from Texas is having that problem. I got her into one place, but the rent's kind of high. But it was the only thing we could find at the time, and now we're trying to get her in a better situation. It's more affordable. And
I hardly ever see her online anymore. Is she okay? Is she?
She's taking classes at college.
Okay. Oh, that's
and working, so she's pretty busy. But
I was gonna say I never see her anymore.
Yeah, I was gonna try to get down to Philly at some point in the near future. But yeah, which is pretty fucked up because again, especially in her case, knowing what she got in trouble for, she was helping people, but it was it's considered illegal what she did, so
Right. Well, hey friends, we're coming close to 3 hours, and I do want to wrap it up around about 3 hours plus or minus. So is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to cover? Oh, real quick though, before we go there, Michael, did you say there was a fire in Boulder?
Yeah, in El Dorado Canyon.
Wow. Okay. I haven't seen any news today, right? So I don't know that until you mentioned it. So wow, that's pretty intense, man.
Well, it would have been from about 5 hours ago. I was driving home around 5 p.m. and I could already see the smoke columns, and then
Okay, yeah, I'll have to look into that after I get off the show, man, for sure. Yeah. Anyway, is there any topics that we should have covered that we haven't really properly covered?
Oh yeah, there was a lot that happened while you were gone.
Say what?
There was a lot that happened while you were gone.
Well, that's for sure.
First the Earth cooled, and then the dinosaurs came.
It wasn't. No, not a whole lot happened. The whole world's been quiet. It's been unusually dull.
Raven and I did a few hangouts, two of us. We were jonesing for attention, I guess.
I love attention.
Right on. All right. Well, it doesn't seem like anything's bubbling to the surface. So, going once, going twice,
If you're willing to extend the show another 3 hours, Tommy will jump in.
See, the funny thing is, I'm sure if a topic came up, I'm sure we could. I'm just like drawing a blank. I'm tired, and well, we would, and I missed. I definitely missed the show. There's some stuff too I want to talk to you about privately, but
yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I'm up for that. Anyways, all right. Well, hey, thanks to everybody in the side chat for being relatively, non-toxic tonight. I appreciate that as always. And thank you all for showing up upon being invited. And I hope to see you again soon. Michael, Jack, and Joe, if you haven't been interviewed yet, and if you do ever decide to be interviewed, we need to arrange that at your convenience. I'm pretty darn flexible most of the time. Huh?
Peach was next in line.
Peach did hers yesterday.
You were back yesterday?
Yes, I was.
It's on this channel.
Yes, it is. Yeah, but I got the number wrong. I thought it was number 9 because originally last time before I left, she was scheduled for number 9, but I forgot that I had Peter scheduled for number 8. So on the channel, it goes 5679 now. So I'll just have to amend the number, or I'll do 2 number 9s, and then whoever's next will be number 9. I don't know, but
And you'll just do number 9, number 9,
number 9, number 9, number 9, number 9. Yeah.
And they told 2 friends, and so on and so on.
Okay, so we've had 8 interviews, right? Whose interview do you think's had the most views so far? That was true for a long while, but Wayne Watley has more views.
What the fuck? Wayne doesn't have tits.
Maybe he has tits on the inside. I don't know.
That's scary.
I found it very interesting. Yeah, it's always interesting. And,
if you interview me, you might get negative views. Like you give some back.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, you just mull that over in your heads, and so say goodbye to everybody in the side chat, my friends, and we will see you all again next week here on the Dinner